get started. We have all right, we're going to go ahead and get started with the Pledge of Allegiance, and we have CAL FIRE Team 2, Baraka Carter, IC, and California Interagency Team 11, Chris Fogel, IC, for that team, leading us through the Pledge of Allegiance.
Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you for that, Chiefs. So our first guest speaker today, we met her yesterday, Jennifer Hinckley with the Fish and Wildlife Service. She serves on CWCG as a voting member, and last year she was our chair for that group. So welcome, Jennifer. She's going to talk to us about CWCG today.
I brought some of my backup with me. Okay. Again, Jennifer Hinckley, Fish and Wildlife Service. A year ago or so, Jim Tomaselli started screaming that no one knew what the coordinating group was, the California Wildland Fire Coordinating Group. And so we ignored him because that's what we do best. No, I'm teasing. I make jokes. I'm sorry if I offend somebody. So we decided that this is the best place to do the, what is the California Wildland Fire Coordinating Group, or CWCG, which is always called CWCG. And I'm going to try not to double skip. This is 8:15 in the morning, people. Or not. There we go. Who are we? California Wildland Fire Coordinating Group membership are the federal and state leaders of California. That's pretty simple. Of the fire agencies, CWCG is our acronym. Tomaselli's not here, right? Because I did throw him under the bus. Okay. Who's in it? We did it alphabetically. We started with the California Department of Fire and I wrote Fire and Fire Protection. Nobody caught that. Okay. So Curtis Brown, who's retiring, right? So whoever's coming in after him is for CAL FIRE. Association of Contract Counties is Jason Weber. And then Cal OES is Brian Marshall. Forest Service is Jaime Gamboa. And Bureau of Indian Affairs is Nate Gonya, not here. He was replaced yesterday for a little bit just as acting. Bureau of Land Management is Peter Kelly. He's hiding over here in the corner. I'm Fish and Wildlife Service, and Mike Minton is the Park Service. We are the executive committee for the CWCG. Lots of talking happens. If anybody's interested in becoming one of us, just know you have to talk a lot. How do we exist? I did this in the who, what, where, when, why, how type thing. How does CWCG exist? It comes from the CFMA. We talked about that yesterday. It's interagency cooperation. The California Wildland Fire Coordinating Group is built from this. This group shall provide coordination and recommendation on all interagency wildland fire activities in California. Where do we work? California. Okay, here's our random fact. California is the only state that has 2 geographic areas. You'll know them as North Ops and South Ops. Everyone else has, except for Alaska, is only Alaska. The rest of them have multiple states to take care of. What do? We were established to further the interagency cooperation. You'll see my people here with me. One over there. And communication and coordination, and to implement interagency fire management direction within California wildland fire agencies, between the GACs, North Ops and South Ops, and with NMAC, new acronym. That's the National Multi-Agency Coordinating Group. So those people sit in Boise, which, as you all know, is the center of the wildland fire, the federal wildland fire universe, Boise, Idaho. From my house, it takes 10 hours to get there. But I'm up in Sacramento. What do we do? And here, this is going to get lots of words. This is our purpose. Provide interagency leadership and coordinated implementation of fire management policies, direction, and standards. Instill professionalism in all aspects of wildland fire management and develop a full partnership, trust, and mutual assistance among all wildland fire protection entities. Establish committees, task groups, and teams to support CWCG activities. Recommend a unified course of action based on the principles of the National Cohesive Wildland Fire Management Strategy, which you can Google, and the California Fire Plan, also Google, in order to promote safety and provide oversight in all aspects of fire and incident management, including the following: firefighter and public safety, ecosystem management, wildland-urban interface, fuels and resource management, fire management planning, and decision support. I got 2 more pages. Okay, here we go. We provide input to the geographic areas interagency wildland fire safety and risk programs. We provide input to the wildland fire training programs. We are the ones who approve nominations for S520. And if there was a S620 at any random time that they were going to put on, we put in the nominations, we approve the nominations for that. We facilitate efficiencies in all California incidents operations at all levels, including monitoring and evaluating the performance of all federal California interagency management teams. Those are the federal ones. CWCG is what we keep hearing ourselves called. Serve as a California multi-agency coordinating group, CalMac, which is above the 2 MACs that are at North Ops and South Ops. We coordinate both the California Geographic Area Coordination Centers, the GACs, North Ops and South Ops, and we approve the mobilization guide for California and other interagency guides as necessary. So not only is there a lot of talking, there's a lot of words on paper. I'm just saying, when you want to move into these positions. I didn't know that when I moved in the position. I was naive. We recommend policy changes to agency administrators. We're working on that all the time. We're getting better at that. Serves as a geographic area's point of contact for all requests requiring interagency action. Since there's a lot of us, we have a chair. You know, the chair right now is Jaime. Our new chair will be here sooner or later, but Jaime's going to hold the chair until something happens. So if you have a question and you can't find your representative from your agency, you can always call Jaime Gamboa. The California Wildland Fire Coordinating Group is a year-round group, this is our WEN, that meets monthly or more as needed. Sometimes it's more. I just want you to know it's a lot more. Since California has 2 GACs, North Ops and South Ops, each GAC has a MAC group that coordinates the movement and sharing of resources as needed within their geographic areas and with each other, which is pretty significant. Our GACs, I don't know if you know, are talking all the time and sharing what they can. Luckily, in the last few years, when one GAC is having trouble, the other GAC hasn't been having trouble, so they've been able to move resources around. What happens is when we get into areas where movement becomes high, we don't have resources, and our 2 GACs are not communicating, you've got CalMac. CalMac comes in and makes a decision. CalMac are the same players that I listed earlier, CWCG. We'll come in, make a decision, everybody will be happy, and we'll move forward. That's how I see it. Otherwise, due to the, yes, this is my fabulous communication. Use the word fabulous in here. I was excited about that. How does CWCG do what it does? We have an executive group. I listed those people. We have technical advisors that come from North Ops and South Ops. We also have standing committees. These committees work a lot also. If you're interested in having more work, no, I'm teasing this, you can join them. The operations committee is the committee that put this entire week together for us. They did a fabulous job, and I'm very proud of them. Thank you. We have a training working committee. We have an interagency wildland fire business group. They used to be called CFA, but they've changed their name, so that may not be their name right now. The California Wildland Fire Safety and Risk Management Committee. We also have a Prevention Mitigation Education Committee. And the new one, which is truly exciting for me because I get to liaise to it, is the California Strategic Fire Environment and Planning Committee. That may not be its name, but that's the nerds. Okay, and the first thing that we've been, as we build this committee, the first thing that one's working on is updating the SAW-T, which is the Santa Ana Wind Threat Index, and including all the other major winds that we happen in California, so that on a smaller scale, so we know what's really happening and we can actually do our jobs better. We're reaching out to NASA to get them to use their brains for us. It's exciting, huh? And then we have this oversight from NMAC, that's going back to Boise, and we have a liaison. I don't know if you guys can't see that very well. So in the federal world, we have the Wildland Fire Leadership Council, which is at the top. Those are mostly department players. And then you work your way down to the heads of the federal agencies, but it also includes, for the state people, there is the National State Foresters Liaison. His name is Jim Carls. He's in there. So the states are in there. There's other lots of groups. If you want to talk about all the groups that happen at this level, you want to talk to Mike Minton. He's on every one of them. Okay, maybe not all of them. But it's a huge, massive alphabet soup, and when you go talk to these people, if you don't know what the acronyms are, because there could be two letters that are switched. So it's not fun even for us to talk to them. So then we get down to the National Wildland Fire Coordinating Group, NWCG. We've all heard of them. They do most of the standards that we all work under as wildland firefighters. And then below them, you'll see the NMAC, which is the second box from the left. And then they work with us to make sure that we're doing what we need with moving resources, getting resources, and sharing as needed. So what's NMAC? It's comprised of members who've been delegated authority to provide essential management mechanism for national level strategic coordination to ensure the firefighting resources are efficiently and appropriately managed in a cost-effective manner. During the fire season, during the summer, we communicate with our liaison, who is Jim Schultz, next line, the liaison to the California Wildland Fire Coordinating Group is the Park Service representative. So even if Jim retires, the next Park Service person that's in his place will be our representative. And we talk with them daily, if not multiple times during the day when we're in PL4 and PL5. And we could be any one of us. It's not just one of us. And then the mission, of course, is they're trying to set priorities and resource allocation. We got that. The relevant roles, they establish national priorities. They direct, allocate, and reallocate resources among and between the geographic areas that meet national priorities. So the big thing, that they're the big picture, and then we're just a piece in their picture. So when we're screaming for resources, they're trying to, they're also getting other people that are screaming for resources. So it'd be Great Basin, maybe Rocky Mountain, Alaska, somebody, Pacific Northwest. Depends on what the fire season is. They determine the national preparedness levels and provide oversight. So how do we do what we do? The California Master Cooperative Wildland Fire Management and Stafford Act Response Agreement, CFMA. That is how we do what we do. I like to just call it the Stafford Act for fun. Throws people off. The CFMA is an agreement to improve efficiency by facilitating the coordination and exchange of personnel, equipment, supplies, services, information, and funds among the agencies, and only wildfires and non-wildfire emergencies or disasters that are presidentially declared are covered by the agreement. It says in the CFMA right now. Got that. But there we go. And then this is just a little thing on the CFMA, and for those that are confused, because we only chose to change one letter, you got the CFMA and the CFAA, right? So the CFAA is an agreement based on the Federal Reciprocal Act for the local government fire and emergency assistance to the state of California and the federal wildland fire agencies. That is the one that Cal OES comes into this play with that one. CFMA is mostly just the federal fire in the state, Cal Fire. There we go. That is all. No, which it's pretty fast. There's room for all kinds of questions, if you have questions. I know, it was perfect. No questions? I even brought the big guns up with me so that, you know. Oh, there you go. Yeah, so that's what CWCG is. We're here to help. It sounds exactly like when someone comes from the state office or the regional office. I'm here to help you. But I am, and the other ones are also. We're just trying to help and make better. That's my short words. Okay, thank you so much. Have a great day. You can talk to me later.
Great. Thank you so much, Jennifer, and thank you so much to the CWCG representatives that were up here with her. Before we move on to our next speaker, we do have a few announcements, so I'm going to turn it over to Plans for those announcements.
Good morning, everyone. Derek Parker from Team One Plans. A couple things based on the feedback that we got from everyone yesterday. The first thing we want to address to you guys is Wi-Fi. A lot of questions about where we get on. So if you are looking for Wi-Fi, it's the IMTCon 23, and the password for everyone in here is all lowercase FireHat 23. So I'll repeat that. It's lowercase FireHat 23. The evaluations, we got a number, probably more evaluations than we anticipated, good participation. So we got 91 yesterday. The message that we need to pass to everybody is make sure that at the end of the day, we get the evaluations turned in and we can adjust based on things like Wi-Fi, based on room temperature, we can get those issues addressed. Additionally, for the executive Q&A, yesterday's, all the responses for the executive Q&A are due by 1700 tomorrow. And lastly, where do you find your information? Where do you find your schedule? Where do you find your room assignments? If you have your name tag, there's a QR code on the back, and we have access to the story map. The story map will give you all the information. If you have the story map, you're able to get into whatever you need to. So we will be in general session until lunch, and enjoy your day.
Great, thank you. So our next speaker this morning, we're going to bring up Jesse Bender. Jesse Bender is the Incident Workforce Development Coordinator and Chair of the Incident Workforce Development Group. And so Jesse has been tasked with overseeing with her committees and groups the development of complex incident management teams. And I know that the CWCG teams in the room are familiar with that term. For the CAL FIRE teams in the room, that may be a new term to some of you. And so that's why we really wanted to take an opportunity at this workshop to have Jesse speak to us about what these teams are, what does that look like for the future of incident management teams, not only in California, but across the nation, and how that implementation plan is currently moving forward and will continue to move forward through the 2024 start date for these teams. So I know there's lots of questions, there's lots of information being desired about these teams, and this is not only important for the CWCG teams, this is also important for our CAL FIRE teams, because we will be continuing to work on unified command assignments with the CWCG teams as they go through this transition. So what does that mean for us? What do we need to know about these teams and how that may or may not affect our working together with them on unified command incidents? For our agency administrators, also hugely important that you understand the dynamics of the complex incident management teams and your roles and responsibilities when you are activating a CIM team, and what that means for you when that's coming to either your forest or your unit in a unified command capacity. So a really important topic that all of us need to be aware of in California and across the nation so that we are prepared for this implementation and adjustment. So for the CWCG teams, like I talked about, that transition will be occurring in 2024. For our CAL FIRE teams, there's been a lot of questions about will CAL FIRE be following suit with transitioning to complex incident management teams. So right now, our agency's stance is that we are going to continue continue with our Type 1 incident management teams. Our teams are not on the national rotation, and being a single agency team overseen by CAL FIRE, we have the authority to decide whether or not we stay with that Type 1 status or transition to the complex incident management. And as we continue to watch the development of the complex incident management, we will continue to evaluate as an agency whether or not that's something that would be value for our agency to transition over in the future. But as of now, we are continuing with our current configuration and typing of our teams. But really important that we do understand what that means for our CWCG partners, and so that we can be interacting and cooperating to the best of our abilities together on incidents. So really appreciate Jesse coming all the way out here to do this presentation with us. Mike Mitten, who's been the lead on the CWCG side as well for this, will be up here as well. We do anticipate that there will be lots of questions with this presentation, so there will be folks in the audience available with microphones. This is your opportunity. You have the experts on this topic on the stage, and so we really want to use this opportunity. We gave a big portion of this morning's workshop to be able to have dialogue about this topic. And so if you have questions or something you want to know, this is the opportunity to ask those questions. So just really want to invite that to the audience this morning, so all of you know that that's kind of the expectation of this next session. So Jesse and Mike, welcome to the stage, and thank you for being here this morning. Good to see you. Good to see you.
Good morning, and we may even have a little extra time since things are moving a little faster this morning. So I want to reiterate what Annalise said. We're going to have a chance for questions. So I'm going to start with the talking at you portion of sharing the information, sharing the update. Really want to spend a lot of time emphasizing the why of this, and then we'll have time to go to questions from the audience. So to start off with the background of it, the Incident Workforce Development Group, which I'm the chair, and currently this is my entire job, is devoted to leading Incident Workforce Development Group and the implementation of complex incident management. The IWDG, and Josh, you can pull that up at your convenience. Thank you. The Incident Workforce Development Group was chartered in 2018 by the Fire Management Board, which is composed of the federal fire directors at NIFC, by the National Multi-Agency Coordinating Group, which you heard Jennifer talk about a little bit, and by the National Wildfire Coordinating Group, NWCG Executive Board, which she also talked about a little bit. Having all three of those groups charter IWDG gives us avenues to affect all facets of wildland fire management. Through NWCG, we can get to the standards, to the training. Through NMAC, we can get to mobilization practices and team configuration. And the FMB establishes policy for all of the federal fire agencies and works very closely with the National Association of State Foresters, NASF, to ensure that they don't create federal policy that is going to drastically conflict with or create issues for the states and the NASF partners. Josh, you can go ahead and scroll down to that introduction piece there a little bit. Thank you. The composition of IWDG is made of representatives of other groups. So we as a body don't own anything. We have no jurisdiction to speak of. We make recommendations, and those are implemented, once approved, through subgroups of our three charter entities. So for example, the Incident Commanders Advisory Council, the Coordinating Group Advisory Council, several of the NWCG committees that have functional area oversight. They have representation on IWDG and are then able to go back to their groups and make the changes to the publications and the products and the standards and the training that they all own and oversee and provide feedback on. As it happens, IWDG has representation from every geographic area in the country. We do have a couple of agency-specific reps, including an NASF rep and an International Association of Fire Chiefs representative. So we are an intergovernmental body, and as such, we make our recommendations with that intergovernmental aspect in mind. We try to be very cognizant of the fact that there are implications that are different between the federal and the non-federal agencies, and to ensure that our recommendations take all of that into account. Even if it's not perfect the first time, we're taking everybody into account and trying to find that middle ground that will work for all of those partners that are involved. There's a lot of information in this story map. I know a lot of you have seen it, and I'm not going to go through it all. So for those who haven't, who may not have seen all of this information, I want to let you know that it's here, and that if that link hasn't already been shared, it will be. It's super easy to find if you just Google Incident Workforce Development Group, and you can find the additional stats, the additional information, background, all of that that's in here that I'm not going to cover today. So what I want to talk about next a little bit is the rationale, the why we're doing this. So under the future model portion, we have a section on rationale. The intent of complex incident management is not to overcomplicate our system, but to give us more flexibilities within the system. So CIMs can respond to and manage fires of both type 1 and type 2 complexity. This is capitalizing on what the incident command system was always intended to do, to expand and collapse to meet the needs of the incident, to bring in more resources when you need more, and to release them to go support other incidents when you don't need them any longer on your fire. That's the rudimentary, fundamental portion of what complex incident management teams are. And as we have examined the issues facing our agencies and our geographic areas in building IMTs, creating sustainable IMTs, and having enough IMTs to respond to the incidents that we're getting, one of the big things that kept coming back to us was the burnout level that people are experiencing. We talked with type 1 people who were tired of constantly being out 21 days every time they went out. And every single fire was wildland-urban interface and extreme situations unlike we've seen 20 years ago. And as we talked to type 2 personnel, we heard burnout because they're out so many days of the year, so many times. 5 and 6 and 7 assignments a year is unsustainable for people who also have day jobs and families. And as a way of overcoming that, we need to equalize the number of assignments that everybody gets, the number of days out that everybody is spending, so that we're all carrying a little bit more equal share of the water. One of the things we saw last year was that there were teams that had been out 5 and 6 times, while there were other teams that had not been out at all. It took us all the way until August of last year for every single type 1 or type 2 team in the interagency teams, I should clarify, to have had at least one assignment. So we had people who were super burned out. We had supervisors who were like, yeah, no, you're not going out again. Are you kidding? I need you to do your day job. That's not a sustainable practice to have those kinds of feelings out there in the system. So a big piece of our rationale is spreading that workload, ensuring that everybody is getting a chance to go out. And Josh, you can go down to that next piece. Thank you. More efficient management of the teams that we have is another piece of this, reducing the number of transitions that are needed. As we've all seen, and especially over the last 5 to 10 years, as our fire environment is drastically changing in some places, we are quickly escalating from a type 3 incident to a type 2 incident to a type 1 incident. And so what that means is we're mobilizing a team, in briefing them, and then mobilizing the next team up and in briefing them, and so on and so forth. With complex incident management, once the team is assigned, as the fire continues to grow or even decrease in complexity, you order more people to support the incident rather than bringing in a whole new batch of people and a whole new team and having to then in-brief them. So it's a more efficient management of our people and a reduction in the number of transitions that we need. We'll also be able to work under a single rotation process. Instead of having dueling rotations within geographic areas, we'll have one rotation process. More efficient management of agency administrator and public expectations is a big part of this. Last year in New Mexico, they had pushback from their political representatives over ordering a type 2 team to a type 2 fire. We all know it was a perfectly legitimate order. It was the right tool for the incident, but that was not understood by their politicals after they had had so many Type 1 teams in place that the perception became, well, you're not bringing your best. You're not bringing the most important. You're not prioritizing this fire. Whether real or perceived, those issues are out there, and they are causing hardships for some of our land management agencies. And that's another piece that we're trying to address, is what does the public expect? They expect our best and brightest. And we all know that our Type 2 teams are just as good as our Type 1 teams, and everybody has their role and does their thing, but that's not the expectation and perception in a lot of realms. Better identifying the positions and support roles that are appropriate for virtual capacity, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but that's a piece of this too, and that's something IWDG had talked about for a couple of years prior to the pandemic, and the pandemic was like that big smack in the face that everybody needed to actually start doing it and embrace it a little bit more and realize that we could do it. And now as we continue to identify the next steps and phases of implementation, providing some structure and framework to virtual support is important. And then finally, the streamlining of qualifications, of training courses, the processes to achieve qualification and certification, not to water it down. I really want to emphasize that the intent is to get the right material taught at the right levels, to get the right experience in the task books and in the process to achieve full qualification at complex incident management level. A couple more things I want to talk about in terms of the rationale. All of the geographic areas are having their challenges and are having their successes. They're not all the same challenges and they're not all the same successes. When we talk with the Southwest, they have enough people to staff teams of 80. So they don't see where there's a problem rostering. But what we're hearing from the agency administrators in the Southwest is that concern about how many days their people are spending on incidents and not in the office doing their day job. And one of the pieces that we need to consider nationally for this change is how to make it better for everybody. If it's working in one area but not working everywhere else, we have to evaluate whether or not that's a practice we want to sustain, or do we need to evolve it. The Southwest has got a lot of really good success with building their teams, but then they're running them into the ground when they have a fire year like last year. We need to share that workload and bring in more teams from out of geographic areas when a geographic area, any geographic area, is extremely busy and running team after team after team through fires. So that's one of our goals in all of this, is to also share the workload within the geographic area, not just nationally. Agency administrator support, line officer supervisor support for team participation is a major struggle in some of the geographic areas more than others. The eastern area, as another example of how we're looking at this from the national good, they want to be able to stand up more teams. They want to get their teams out on fires, but they have trouble holding people on teams when they roster, they build the roster, they give their availability, and then their team sits. It's hard to keep that morale, keep that engagement when people aren't getting out on fires. So looking from the eastern area, this is an opportunity to get into that national rotation cycle a little bit more, get out and get used, get exercised, and then be able to continue to build robust teams because they're being utilized out there. You know, as California is already on the pathway to all Type 1 teams, this is really a very similar concept to what you've all been working on here already, to create more flexibility, to create that opportunity for people to manage the fire with fewer administrative boundaries tied to the fire. Double checking my notes here. The increased need for teams and the changing wildland fire environment are a huge part of what's driving this, but also that work-life balance and the day job balance are another big piece. Every time IWDG talks about what the concerns are and what the obstacles are and how we can overcome both of those, we come back to what is best for the people that are part of these teams. How are we balancing their life? How are we balancing their day jobs in all of these decisions and recommendations and in the actuality of team usage? And to encourage to show our agency administrators and supervisors that we are valuing their day job, that we want people to be able to spend times doing their day job so they can also be available for incident management team assignments. So to talk a little bit more through the nuts and bolts of this implementation, we are targeting 2024 for full implementation. That's now less than a year away. There will be some pieces that are fully implemented in January. For example, all of our interagency incident management teams being complex incident management teams. It means we'll have roughly 40 teams in the national rotation for next year. Some pieces will take few more months to get to, and so our final target date for implementation is April to allow spring updates to programs and systems and publications like the National Mobilization Guide. So there will be a trickle-through effect over a few months of those final implementation steps. But really from a team standpoint, January of 2024 is the target for our teams. The training and qualifications portion of this. The qualifications now exist for the complex positions. Those 7 C&G position task books are now available, and the NWCG pathway to Type 2 qualification has been closed. The task books that are out there that are open, that have progress in them for Type 2, can roll over to count towards complex qualification. So for anybody with an open Type 2 task book, it's not time lost, signatures wasted. Those Type 2 task books just need to be attached to the complex task book in their position, and they can get full credit for the experience and the work that they've done towards completion of complex certification. The CIM field evaluation form, which many of you may have seen or even used last year, is still a transition tool through 2024. So we have almost 2 more full years of utilizing that form as an equivalency to either the S520 Advanced Incident Management or the Complex Incident Management course, SIMC. After basically January 1st of 2025, after that, the CIM field evaluation tool will go away, and all new and incoming complex trainees will need to go to one of those 2 courses to achieve qualification. The training courses are in the process of being evaluated and reconfigured to support complex incident management. Right now, those trainees, whether they're at the Type 3 level and beginning to move up, or they're already Type 2 qualified and switching over to complex, we're stuck in the confines of what we have right now. We have S420, we have S520, we have L481. Those are the tools we have to work with for the next couple of years. But the NWCG Executive Board has tasked one of their committees with the development of a new IMT steering committee, to develop 2 new courses based on the existing content that we have, one for the Type 3 and unit leader level and one for the complex level. So that once those are done, and the target on those is 2026, once those 2 courses are done, they'll be required at those 2 levels respectively. In the meantime, it means a lot of folks are going to have to go to both courses to move up from Type 3 to complex, or use the field evaluation, as I said, between now and 2025. Next piece I want to cover is mobilization. The national rotation for 2023, and MAC did issue correspondence on that a few weeks ago. If you've not seen it, it's linked in this story map. And it is essentially the same national rotation as we've had, with a couple of new business rules. When NMAC issues guidance on the 2024 national rotation, it'll be much the same with new business rules and with more teams involved in that national rotation. The 21 teams for this year include the previous 16 Type 1 teams, plus 5 new teams that are complex incident management teams, Type 2 teams from last year that have fully completed that transition. All of Rocky Mountains teams, all of Northern Rockies teams, and 2 of Southern Areas teams will be complex incident management teams for this year. So they all have a place in the national rotation, and it's possible that you could transition with them on a fire this summer. They have completed all of those training and qualifications prerequisites. They've worked with their geographic area coordinating groups to make that transition. We had hoped that a few more teams would be ready to do that this year, but there were some geographic areas who didn't feel like they were quite ready to push over into that complex incident management title quite yet. So next year, once all of our interagency teams are CIM, we expect we'll have between 40 and 42 CIMs available nationally. Configuration, and I know this has been a big question, is what are the configuration of complex incident management teams? The Incident Commanders Advisory Council did work last fall to provide a recommendation to NMAC on what that configuration would be, and NMAC approved that almost exactly as it was presented to them. So the core roster for a CIMT is 35 positions. That's your master roster, that's your bottom end baseline for what the team would be. Once mobilized, the incident commander and agency administrator then negotiate up to an additional 35 positions. That is based on the incident needs. And then additionally, a team can bring up to 20 trainees. This means a CIMT mobilizing to an incident could go with 35 on the low complexity type 2 side to 90 on the higher complexity type 1 side. So it's a lot of flexibility to build the right team for the incident, not to just automatically take 100 people to any fire, but to recognize that every fire's got unique needs. Some of them need all of the things. Some of them need more support in some functional areas than others. Some fires need a lot of logistics, but the operation really isn't that difficult. This team configuration helps address that and helps get to where are those needs. Do you need 13 division supervisors, or do you need 5, but you need a whole lot of support in logistics or finance to help that host unit? Having that conversation between the IC and AA is super important for what the fire is doing and what it needs, and the tool for having that conversation is NWCG's Wildland Fire Risk and Complexity Assessment. That link is also available in this story map if you haven't seen it. And with this year's revision, there's a new section on functional complexity that drills down into each functional area. What are the pieces that are driving the complexity there? And so what does the incident need to support that? Some of the next work that IWDG and our related groups are going to be working on are some of the additional standardization practices. What I want to emphasize with any standardization is that from our frame and our perspective, it's standardizing to the degree appropriate and necessary. It's not down to the gnat's butt. It's get the right pieces that we need to standardize. Think templates, think forms, think basic processes and procedures that allow us all to function in a similar manner and allow somebody to go from one team to another and not have to relearn the entire incident command system in the process. Geographic area procedures are part of that. When NMAC, and you hear this from Jim Schultz, who is your NMAC representative, as Jennifer was saying, when NMAC is trying to prioritize between geographic areas, they have to be able to compare fairly. Every geographic area has its nuances and its unique pieces, and so to consider that and bring that in, but to also have a standard set of evaluation for drawdown levels, for example, for the processes and procedures that drive those priorities, so that NMAC can look at it and compare California to the eastern area in an appropriate light. Right now, those standards are variable, we'll just say, from geographic area to geographic area, and getting to a place where it's reasonably equitable and NMAC can compare apples to apples is the goal of that tasking. A component of it, for another example, is how trainees are assigned to incidents. To ensure that, when a team goes to another geographic area, do they have to learn that geographic area's processes for assigning priority trainees, or is there some consistency in the system so that there can be some expectations? The next piece is IMT standards. Identifying those practices, again, templates, formats, business processes that we can standardize from team to team to team to ensure some degree of continuity in a transition, for example, or as I said, as an individual goes from one team to another team to work. To the degree appropriate, again, not to squash creativity, not to squash innovation or the need to be flexible and meet an incident's needs, but to at least achieve some sort of professional level of expectation across the board, and to give agency administrators an evaluation metric. When they're filling out an IMT evaluation, right now there's no basis for them to compare to, and so most likely it's whatever their experience was with the last team or whatever their FMO thinks is right, and it's a much more subjective system. Adding some IMT standards into the mix gives them an objective piece to look at in comparison. And then I mentioned the virtual framework and support. IWDG has just been tasked by NMAC with developing standards and framework for virtual incident support, and then also identifying surge capacity options, how we can better utilize our people more effectively and efficiently, because so we boil it down, we're not finding more people out there who are wanting to be part of incident management teams and getting turned away. We need to be more effective and efficient with how we're using the people that we have and the teams that we have, because our capacity is not increasing by leaps and bounds, and there's no magic pool of people out there just dying to be a part of this. We are looking for ways we can create more agreements with typically non-standard partners and agencies to increase capacity where we can, but we know that that's not going to be our big ticket selling item. We need to better utilize the people we have first. The last thing I want to point out on the story map is there is an FAQ section. So again, as you come back to this for more information or to find links that I've mentioned and so forth, these FAQs also offer a number of very basic regurgitations of the information. I'm a type 1 trainee, how do I get to complex? I'm a type 2 trainee, what do I do to get to complex incident management? Things of that nature. And then the last piece I'll emphasize, and then I'll give Mike a second to add in anything else from his perspective before we go to questions. But the last piece I want to point out is the context and feedback portion of this. IWDG is heavily reliant on the constructive feedback that's coming in from the field as we work through this implementation. We've put a plan on paper. We have an action plan for this implementation. We've put a lot of recommendations out to our 3 charter groups. We've done a lot of work with our membership groups on what we think this should look like and how it should work. We know that plans on paper are not perfect. When reality hits, there's going to be some differences. There are going to be some things that work better. There are going to be some things that don't work quite like we had imagined. The key to fixing those things is your constructive feedback. How can we make it work better? How can we implement this in a way that's going to work for all of us and be to the betterment of our collective work and intent as incident management teams? There, you can reach out to us on our roster. You can find the link to our roster here, and I'm 100% available to answer questions, have a conversation, whatever the case may be. You can also provide anonymous feedback through that Provide Constructive Feedback button. And if you have a question, you can put your contact information in there too to get a reply. And then finally, there are 3 links there in orange that are more constructed survey questions to help guide you if you want to provide some feedback but aren't really sure where to start. This gives you a little bit of framework for answering some questions and providing that feedback back to us. We need to hear from you. We need to know, and we know there's a lot of conversation going on. We know there are a lot of good ideas that are circulating out there. And if we can help bring those good ideas to the surface, if we can help move them forward, if we can make something work better for you, we need to hear about it. We need to hear from you. And Mike, I'll give you a chance before I go to questions.
Thanks, Jesse. So just a couple of things real quick. IWDG has been in existence for more than 4 years now, 5, almost 5. I'm one of the original members when it was a much smaller group, and my membership to IWDG is not through my day job employing agency, and it's not through a coordination group membership affiliation. It's through ICAC. And so I chaired ICAC for a couple of years, and through that membership in ICAC, that's how I got connected to IWDG. And that's still the group in which I represent on IWDG. That said, I'm able to be a conduit to bring some of this back to the agency I work for and the coordination groups that I work in. Up until about 3 months ago, I was the chair of the Pacific Northwest Wildfire Coordination Group, and so an awful lot of my engagement that wasn't connected to ICAC was really trying to represent the Pacific Northwest. Through some changes, now I'm committed and just focused on California and being a coordination group member here, and have passed that baton on for the Pacific Northwest. And so I'm looking forward to trying to help connect some dots here for California as we continue to move forward and progress on this. So that's my history with this. I think to try and draw the connection back to Jennifer's presentation just a few minutes ago, how we as a coordination group interact to this, the work that IWDG does is essentially through a few different facets. One is through CGAC. We have a member of CWCG that is our CGAC liaison, and Jaime fills that role for us, and so Jaime's a part of CGAC, and as Jesse shared with you, many of the taskings that have been brought forward by whether it's NWCG or NMAC have gone to CGAC. And so Jaime represents California in the room for those conversations on taskings or decisions that get issued and sent through CGAC back to California. So that's an important one to understand. My affiliation is still through ICAC and bringing taskings back to ICAC to work on. Jesse mentioned the last one, which was the IMT configuration tasking. We worked on that not once but twice in ICAC, and it was this second iteration that was eventually accepted as the CIMT configuration to move forward with. So that's just how some of the inner workings operate and how we interact from California back through these processes and these governance structures on this task. It's upon us now, right? So as we recruit for teams in 24, which will be this fall, we're recruiting for CIMs. We're not recruiting for type 1 and 2 teams. So that's a changed state. And what we need to do to prepare ourselves for that is to continue to work on CIM qualifications. So for type 1 qualified people, ensuring that your certifying officials get that onto the cards. For type 2 qualified people, get yourself to 520 or SIMC if you can, and if not, make sure you're working through your certifying official, and if you're a member of a team, your IC, to line out a request for a CIM evaluation. Last year, we did roll a memo out from CWCG that talked about CIM evaluation processes. We have not yet rolled out our 23 memo for that, although we've been talking about it in the coordination group. So we want to ensure that all the teams have a clear understanding of what they need to do to make a request to get a CIM eval done. We made pretty good headway on that last year in California, and I know I got to spend several days with Team 15 while they were assigned, working through more than, I think it was a dozen or two CIM field evals, and good process. So more to come on what the 23 process will look like, but I'll stop right there and give it back to Jesse and stay here to answer questions.
Thank you. I think we have some moderation of questions, if I understand correctly, but where would you like to start? What questions or comments or feedback do you have for us?
Wait for the mic.
Yeah, just feeling, Mike, with the coordination group, how optimistic do you feel that the local government will be here in Region 5 on board by January 2024, as Jesse mentioned? What's that prognosis looking like?
You know, I can't speak to it. I think that, you know, those are decisions that have to be made by CICCS, by the departments. The state foresters have, you know, been a part of this, the state foresters reps. And so I think that, you know, it's on the table for their consideration. One of the things that's important for us to remember is even those partnering agencies that contribute people to our teams now, there are a lot of positions on a roster they can fill that don't require a complex incident management qual, right? So it's not to say that there isn't a place for those folks on these teams. Maybe it's as deputies in some of these positions, or maybe it's as something else on the team. So even as we go through transition and we're kind of awaiting for some of those agency decisions to be made, there are still certainly places within a roster for all those folks.
I'll tag on to that with, we don't have a closure date yet from NWCG for the Type 1 qualification pathway. That does not mean that an agency cannot continue to use the Type 1 and Type 2 qualifications. Any of the agencies independently can choose to continue those qualifications and pathways. The support and structure is still in existence to do so. But from NWCG, from that collective standpoint, that Type 2 pathway is closed and that Type 1 pathway will close at some point. It could be as early as next January, but that might get extended out a little bit as well. As far as when we stop having Type 1 and Type 2 qualifications within NWCG, that's a ways out yet and is a bigger conversation for NWCG, whether or not to just wait until people's quals lapse because they're not using them anymore, or to actually cut them off and not order them from the NWCG side through IROC anymore. Again, they could still be available to an agency to choose to use, to choose to order, but from the collective standpoint, that interagency piece, there will come a point where they're not.
Hey, Jesse, Peter Kelly, State FMO with the BLM. Good morning and thanks for being here. Really appreciate it. Just a really quick question, hopefully to get some dialogue going is, you know, obviously in our geographic areas, we don't have standing federal Type 3 teams. And I was wondering if maybe you could provide some recommendations to California in regards to the pathway with CIM for our to getting folks up to Type 1 level without having those standing Type 3 teams.
Absolutely. The variance, I'll back up just a tiny bit before I get to the real answer of Peter's question. The variance of Type 3 teams nationally is pretty wide right now. We have organized Type 3 teams that are rostered, that attend team meetings, and then on the other end of the scale, we're still using a lot of ad hoc creation of Type 3 teams or the single resource Type 3 I see on the hood of the pickup style. We need both ends of that spectrum, but one of the things we also need is more support to Type 3 incident management. We have evolved over a number of years to increase our use of standing Type 3 teams, but without evolving the training, the standards, the expectations of those teams in the process. So IWDG from the beginning of this recommendation has emphasized we need to support that Type 3 level better than we are, and we need to get up to speed with where they're actually way out ahead of the system in performing and doing what they're doing. So that's one of the reasons why that new course will be required at that Type 3 and unit leader level, is to better support Type 3 personnel. Now, for those who are coming up through the Type 3 level, regardless of being on a team or not, they would take, so for the existing period with the courses that we have right now, they would take both S420 or L481 or O305 and S520 or SIMC or do the field evaluation. Once those new courses are in place, The type 3 level will require that course. The unit leader level will require it. And then as they moved up to complex incident management, they would take that next level course, what we know of as S520 or SIMC right now, before being qualified at the complex level. So in the near term, if you are fully qualified at the type 3 level, you've got 2 courses to take to get up through that pathway. But take advantage of that field evaluation tool as a piece of that as well. The intent behind that was to alleviate the potential bottleneck of suddenly having to put a whole bunch of people through the S520 and SIMC courses. And the evaluation looks at how you interact as a team member. Do you communicate well with your fellow CNG? Do you think strategically? Are you thinking 5-7 days out, or are you stuck in this hour, this day, this burn period? How big are you thinking? How much are you communicating? And what's your ability to grasp the whole situation around you? So it's not, can you fill out this form? Can you do these functional tasks? It's how do you operate as a member of a CNG and think and do in a bigger way than just right now, myself, today, my function. Does that answer your question, Peter? Okay, yeah, of course, thank you.
Yes, Dan Turner, California Team 1. My question is with California, a lot of our members on our teams are local government, portal to portal. A lot of the regions in the past do not accept those people onto their incidents or into their areas. Is that going to be just standardized where everybody that's on the team is going to be able to go and participate, or is it still going to be a lockdown where they won't accept portal to portal?
Take a stab and let you. Okay. As far as in the implementation of complex incident management, there's no immediate change to the financial aspects of that. There are a lot of conversations on what incentivizing our workforce looks like, and that kind of touches what you're asking about there a little bit too. Discussions at the congressional level, the president's budget that was just released, there's a lot of pieces and components of that that include actually recommendations similar to portal pay for all of our agencies, not just some of the state and local government. So I think there's going to be bigger and different conversations to have surrounding that particular point because of some of these changes that are being proposed right now through Congress and such. But at least as of our recommendation, there's no specific changes to pay, finance, administration side of employment. I'll let you add on to that.
Yeah, and so when we have those issues, Dan, it depends on who the ordering unit is, if it's a state or who that is. We generally should not be having those issues in this day and age when we do not have them if it's a federal agency with the incident making the request. But state by state, there can be some nuances with that. And so that's incumbent on the coordination groups that have those states in them, that whether or not they have issue with that. But the agreements that we use to reimburse folks from our kind of our anchor point to make sure that we are capable of doing that and keeping that function intact for us. And I think there's a very limited number of states that we even have that issue with anymore. It has decreased over time. So that's kind of the extent of my understanding of it and where it sits today.
Hi, Kristen Allison. I had a question for you, and I think that you guys hit on part of it is that field evaluation does get at the teamwork aspect and the strategery, but what about the skills? What are you guys thinking for the timeline on that? Because there's a pretty direct path, and some of those people might not be set up for success moving from that 3 level to that 1 level when they don't have that mentorship or anybody there to support them.
2 parts to that answer. One is that we have really emphasized the need for mentorship and support to one another throughout this transition. Last week at the Incident Commanders, 2 weeks ago, excuse me, at the Incident Commanders Advisory Council meeting, the ICs had a lot of conversation about supporting one another. Whatever it is, if it's transition to complex incident management, if it's strategic operations planning, if you need help, call and ask for help. And we need that message to go from our ICs down through our command and general staff, down to our unit leaders and beyond. If you need help, ask for help. If you see somebody who's struggling or needs help, offer to help. We are a learning organization. We talk a lot about mentorship. We take all these leadership courses, and then we go out in the field, and it's like, hey, you're on your own, fly or fall. And that's not the way it should be. And I'm generalizing when I make that joke, but that's not how it should be. If we are truly a mentorship leadership organization, then we need to truly be mentors and leaders. If you need help, it doesn't mean you need a trainer. Maybe you just need somebody to come in alongside you. Maybe you need a deputy to help take your load. Any and all of us should be willing to ask for that help and offer that help without it being a status or a positional kind of emphasis. We need to be better about actual mentorship and actual leadership. The second piece to my answer is that every one of us knows that there are people at every level of our organizations who are amazing at what they do, and there are people at every level of our organizations who are the opposite of amazing. And we need to recognize that everybody's skill level is a little bit different, regardless of what their qualification is, regardless of what their position is, and that we should take those people who are really good and have them helping the other people who are not as good, regardless of qualification, regardless of position. If we think high reliability organization type of tenants, who knows what to do and how to do it? And those are the people we should be relying on, acknowledging that there are going to be some people who are a little bit weaker in some of these skill areas and are going to struggle a little bit more. So let's emphasize that leadership and that mentorship, come alongside them and help them suck less and be better at what they're doing.
How does this affect positions that are not type specific? Like resource unit leader and things like that. How does that affect and what's the pathway for the complex incident management?
If you're choosing to stay at that resource unit leader level, no impact. You can be a resource unit leader on any type of incident now, and going into complex incident management, you can as well. If you're going to choose to move up from resource unit leader to a C&G member, you would, just like with the Type 3 pathway, right now you would have to take 2 courses to achieve that qualification. In the future, you would take the basic course, the lower level incident management team course to become a resource unit leader first, and then you would move up to that C&G and take that complex level course.
Hello.
Hi.
Vicki Wilson, California Interagency Incident Management Team 4. I'll try and make this brief, but it's a very important subject to me. A team involves cohesion, and our team is kind of like known for being a teaching team. Our incident commander, Rocky Elbluger, stresses it constantly, that we're bringing in people, the people you were just talking about, you know, and setting them up for success. But one of the reasons we're successful at that is because we have cohesion amongst our team. We have interfunctional collaboration, and we know we have that cohesion going on. And with a complex incident management team, I don't foresee that. And I'm saying that not because I haven't experienced it. I feel like in this last year, although we were one of the teams that only went out once last year, our finance section was out I don't know how many times with different teams, mentoring, training, setting up for success. But what I experienced last year, and you may have received a few of the letters I sent up the chain with regard to my concern about, as far as finance goes, the lack of competency in the finance section and what that's really resulting in on the ground in the last several years is that we have contractors and others that see that instability, that lack of cohesion in a finance section, and they take advantage of it to the tune, I'm sure, of millions of dollars, and I'm not saying that lightly, millions of dollars of fraud and waste because we don't have that interfunctional connection. It's just little things, but they add up. And I have a big concern with CIMT and the future of a cohesive unit because it takes more than 25 people or 35 people on a type 1 incident. And I know I could debate you about pretty much everything you said, but I just want to really stress the fact that the reason that the incident command system was developed was to expand and contract, and I've seen it work that way. And it works that way with our team, you know? When we're done, we're done. I mean, if we're only using that, I don't understand why then we have to break off into bits. And the last thing I'll say is that after a couple of years of not having any training, basic training for finance section, you know, the S261 and EI Suite trainings, we put it on this spring. And the minute we put it out there, it was full. We're putting on another one in May. And I was even approached by somebody here wanting some information about putting it on somewhere else because there is a lot of interest in going out. It's not the lack of interest, it's the lack of managerial consent, you know? That's an ongoing problem, not a new thing. None of this I'm saying is new, but it's like, to me, the real solution is in that support from above that is not there, non-existent. And I'll tell you what, attorneys love it. Attorneys are going to love this thing.
CIM is not meant to take away the team cohesion. And yes, the configuration has some different numbers, and I'll let Mike touch a little bit more on how ICAC came to agreement on what those numbers would be. But the core roster is still there. And I think any of us who have been on teams for any amount of time know that you have a master roster, and then you have reality. And by the time between the time that the master roster gets published and the first assignment of the year actually happens, you may only be going out with 3/4 of your master roster in general. Those things happen, and so there is always a need to develop cohesion. There are certain positions that are very often not part of master rosters and that are ordered in to help the team. And a section chief, a unit leader, has to create that cohesion on the incident. Is it the easiest thing to do? No, it's a heck of a lot easier to be with the people we already know, that we've already worked with for a lot of years and that we're comfortable with, and that you finish each other's sentences in the yurt kind of thing. But the reality is that our workforce that is coming in behind us is not as interested in the level of commitment that our predecessors applied to incident management, nor are their supervisors interested in the level of commitment that had previously been given to incident management. We are seeing more and more large fires on an annual basis. The stats and the numbers have increased so much for days out by teams every year, by number of assignments, the number of type incidents that we're seeing on an annual basis. Those numbers are just going up and up and up. And we're living in a very different environment right now than was existence 20 years ago, that was in existence 20 years before that. And we have to adapt. We have to be a strong enough organization to overcome some of these challenges to create a better business model moving into the future. There's going to be challenges. It's not all going to be rainbows and puppies and sunshine, and we know that. But how can we make it work? How can we build that cohesion on the incident and work together? How can we work together with our teams so that if somebody from your team needs to come out with my team, we can create that cohesion ahead of time and have, as a geographic area, have a relationship with each other as teams to be able to make those things happen. And again, to mentor one another, to lead one another. I'm super proud of you guys for being that learning team, for being that team who's willing to go out and support others, because not every team nationally can say that, or at least they might say it, but they may not actually be doing it. And so the fact that you are is critical to all of our success collectively. But collectively, we have to make some change because right now we're bleeding out. We're down 5 teams this year from last year. That's huge. That's nationally, but that's huge. We've got to do something. We've got to change something, or we're just going to keep getting the same thing. We're going to keep seeing a decline in the number of teams available. We're going to have to keep assigning type 2 teams to type 1 incidents when we have no other option, and we're going to be forcing type 3 teams to keep holding on to type 2 incidents that are well above their head, well above their experience and knowledge and training level. And that's not fair to them, and it's not fair to the host units to have to keep holding on to fires. So I took your question and feedback, and I kind of ran around a little bit of a different trail, but the point is we'll still have some of that cohesion. Will it be with all maybe 75 people that you've traditionally had on your rosters? Maybe not, but it will be a core cohesive unit. And NMAC has left the door open for how you get those additional people when your IC and the agency administrator negotiate the additional roster. There's no hard and fast way that you got to build those people right now. You can order them in the blind from IROC. You can have your little secret black book list that you call. Your geographic area may provide specific guidance on how that is created and how that's done. But right now there's a lot of opportunity for how those additional 35 people and those 20 trainees are built and assigned. So don't discount the opportunities of that either in what that cohesion looks like and in what the team going into the future looks like. Anything to add?
Yeah, I'll just add that I think, Vicki, what you're describing is a capacity problem. It's not really a cohesion problem. We don't foresee cohesion issues. ICs are still going to be selecting their teams. So cohesion can stay intact. I mean, those are IC decisions. Coordination group's role is to select ICs, but the ICs select their teams. So, cohesion's going to be what the ICs decide it's going to be. Capacity is really the problem, though, and so capacity is a big piece of what we're trying to get at with this. We're supporting 16 teams in California. Local government supports 16 teams in California. Is that the right number? How sustainable is that? Can we put all 16 of those teams out at the same time if asked to do so? I mean, those are the kinds of questions that we have to be thinking about. What's the likelihood that that would happen? Probably not high, but we've seen some things in the last 5 years that suggest it's not out of the question. So as we work on the next tasking in the coordination group, which is the development of a transition plan, there's a lot of questions that have to be answered. We need to get at this question of ordering CIMs, and when you go beyond a core roster, what does that negotiation process look like to make sure that we scale the right number of people to the right incidents, so that we don't, deplete everything with the first 5 teams that go out and have very little left for the next 5 interagency teams to go out the door next. We have a network of people across local government that are not just committed to our interagency teams, but committed to our CAL FIRE teams. And so that's put strain on counties and departments. That's a lot of people that we've increasingly asked for more and more and more of. We have a huge dependency on our ADs and our retired workforce from the federal agencies. Absolutely, we want those people involved in our teams. There's some skilled, qualified people that we want a part of those teams. But when we're trying to measure capacity, what does our capacity look like? That's a tough thing to measure when the demographics of your teams are coming from a lot of different places, right? And so measuring capacity is a challenge when we are looking at those things. But our transition plan has to include a lot of details. There's a lot of details that have to go into that, and things that are less important but no more fun to talk about, like the numbering of the teams, the logos of the teams, all those fun things that we've talked about before need to be components of this transition plan that we roll out. So we need to roll up our sleeves and do some work on that in the next months to come. to make sure that we answer as many of these questions as we can in our transition plan and set ourselves up for success to the fullest extent that we're able to do that. Capacity, though, I think is more than anything what you're getting out there, Vicki, and that's a tough one. So.
Hey, good morning, Michael Nobles, California Interagency Team 4. Thank you, Mike and Jennifer, for giving us a brief. My question goes to the national rotation that you spoke to in 2024, and how does that impact the existing regional rotation? Are we still going to have an existing regional rotation? Okay.
Absolutely. Geographic areas still have to manage their internal rotation and ensure that the local needs are met. And the national rotation really is going to be a lot of the same as it is right now. You have your commitment to the national rotation, you have your commitment to the geographic rotation, and the geographic area can figure out how those two kind of cross over so that you're not available all of the time as a team. But some of those rules of the national rotation will be adjusted to account for having more teams in the national rotation. One of those for this year is that there will be a 7-day unavailability period for teams after an assignment of 7 days or more. And that is to encourage that increased work-life and work balance, to ensure that after you get off an assignment and get back home, you have time at home. You're not immediately building the next roster on your days off, and that you have time back in the office before your team is available again. Now, if you're sadistic and you want to immediately go back out on the next incident, great. There's nothing that stops an individual from being available again, but that team unavailability period is being built in as a true business rule, not just a good idea, but an actual business rule.
Judy Reynolds, Finance Chief on California Team 4. Mike, you touched on what I was just trying to ask and trying to visualize in my mind is, what will the application process and team selection look like next year?
Yeah, and that's, I think to some extent, some of the details in that will need to get discussed and worked out in our transition plan. I don't suspect they're going to look tremendously different with the exception of ICAP. We haven't talked about ICAP yet. It's not something we love talking about because it's been a slow train to come out of the station. If you all recall the history of ICAP, how many people understand the history of ICAP, I wonder? It originated here. It was a system that we built through a Forest Service database that eventually died someplace. And ICAP came from California. We developed it. It was actually the operations committee that put ICAP together many, many years ago to help us be successful with our team recruitment process in California. It worked so great, it went national for a brief period of time before the server was taken away and died. And we accepted ICAP to be that national system of record. And it's not really fully functioned yet. So there is still a planned trajectory for ICAP to be a national system for all of the interagency teams to operate from with recruitment. Whether or not ICAP is going to be race ready in the fall of this year, I'm not even going to begin to try and answer that because I've had mud in my eye by taking information I was handed at one point, saying, yep, it's going to be ready to go, and sharing that with everybody, and it wasn't. So I don't know what that will look like. The plan is still to go to ICAP once it's fully functional, and if it's not fully functional this fall, I suspect we'll continue to do what we have been doing, which is each geographic area kind of has had their own internal processes for that, whether it's Google Forms or something else. And I don't know that any two GAs have been exactly the same in that process. A lot of them are very similar. So we'll have to see if ICAP is our platform for that or not. But in terms of the mechanics of IC selections being made by the coordination group and team selections being made by ICs and approved by our operations group. There's no intention of going down a different path at this point, at least not one that we've discussed in the coordination group.
Hey, good morning. Deputy IC for Team 13, Josh Bain. Just a quick question, Jesse. You quickly mentioned about IMT participation incentives. So just where are we with that? Because until we truly acknowledge and make a recommendation for that, we're going to continue to see a decline in the federal teams, a decline in participation until we truly pay our people for the jobs that they're doing. Or are we just not going to acknowledge it and move on?
We're waiting to hear from the Fire Management Board what components of the president's budget and congressional recommendations are moving forward and what else we can do to work around that supplementally. Different recommendations trying to come at the same outcome through a different means, et cetera. IWDG has actually a couple of times drafted recommendations on incentives, and both times been asked to just sit and hold it and wait for some of these other efforts to culminate and see the success of them before we do anything with our recommendations. I have been told that they're really, really positive about all of the stuff that's coming out and happening, but there's nothing that they're like, here's what we can say yet, here's what we know for sure yet. So we're very much playing the waiting game and have been for several weeks on what the outcomes of that are and what else we can do to help support it.
Morning, Jesse. I have a question. Chris Fogel back here in the back.
Thank you.
So my question is that it's my understanding INMAC has provided discretion within the GAC to roster larger than the 35. And as part of the ICAC task group, overwhelmingly the national ICs for the federal teams agreed that 35 is not the right number. The recommendation that went forward up through the ICAC or to the ICAC working group was 70, with 35 being standard so that team configurations are similar across the nation, and the other 35 positions to make a total of 70 would be discretionary depending on the needs of that GAC. So it got changed a little on what INMAC approved as official, but it's my understanding that INMAC did provide discretion per GAC that if for within GAC activations, we could roster larger up to 70, not just the 35.
No, that has not been the issuance from NMAC. NMAC's guidance in the memo is that it's core rosters of 35 in and out of geographic area. Anything to add to that?
Yeah, so that's correct, and I think at the kind of the fundamentals of this whole thing is, you know, ICS is scalable, right? We all know that. We know that's one of the best tenets of ICS is that it's a scalable organization, and the answer to exactly how many people should be on a team roster and mobilized is it depends on the incident. The incident should drive that, not something external, so that we create the most efficiencies that we can. So we take the right number of people, not just a number of people, but the right number of people. And so when we have gone through this evolution, there's no exact perfect right answer for what that looks like. And so the 35, 35, 20 with scalability built in was the other end of the tube that we came out with that, so that yes, you could have 100 people on your roster that you're mobbing with, but that would hopefully is connected to an incident that is highly complex and requires that. If that's not what you draw, if what you draw is something that in the on the scale of complexity or the ONA, what we used to call, or should still be calling, the organizational needs analysis, is something much further down the scale of that. We should not be taking 100 people to something that the ONA says is a type 2 short, right? So as we move to this single typing of our teams, scalability is key. Because for those of you that have been on type 1 teams for the last 5-10 years, you're not going to be pulling all those same incidents next year. That's going to change. That'll look different. And so we have to have a system that recognizes that we are adapting scalability to incident needs. And that's at the core of scalability of ICS.
Good morning, everybody. Sean Collins, Public Information Officer with California Team 4. And also, I'm on the Public Information Officer Subcommittee with NWCG. So lots of things have been going on within our group over the last 5 years. And my true question will be, what was the thought process with deleting the type 2 level? Because as I see it and our group sees it, we had a stepping stone. The original PIO-F was not really a true type 3. And so we wanted to upgrade that type 3 and going through the 3, 2, and 1 process. Obviously, now that we have that 3 and complex, our belief was that, you know, CAL FIRE still has basically type 3 organizations or type 3 teams within the structure of the state, and they have their type 1 team. But yet they still have their stepping stones within that organization by using the type 2 to the type 1. So what was the thought process to delete that, as I feel, an important stepping stone? Because what we're doing now within our group is looking at a way of how can we have another stepping stone introduced? And one of the thought processes is having unit chiefs. So we get them that supervisory and knowledge within the group before they are impacted with that complex or type 1 level.
My caution would be not to recreate a step that we just got rid of collectively within one functional area. To make a comparison with another functional area, the Incident Operations Subcommittee is trying to figure out whether or not they actually need the branch chief as a position. Now, using the branch chief, yes, we still have that need for branch chiefs within the organization, but do we need it as a position, or could you just order an ops chief to be the branch director? Right now, there is no other, well, now that the type 2 pathway has been closed, they really need to deal with the branch director positions in both ops and logs. But there's no other requirement for the branch director other than being type 2 qualified. And then you get logs or ops branch chief. So they're trying to address whether or not branch needs to be a position on its own that's a step 2 complex, or whether they can get rid of the branch positions altogether. The logistics group is leaning towards getting rid of the branch. Ops is still in the making the sausage mode. But my caution would be, don't recreate a step in the system that we just consolidated into one position. Making that move from type 3 up to complex doesn't mean you should do that after one assignment. I think keep that in mind, that knowledge and experience and trainee level is still critical to the development of that person. And even once they're fully qualified, maybe they shouldn't be the lead on the team. Maybe they should be the deputy. Maybe they should be on the team for a while before they become the lead. So keep those distinctions in mind too. No, not everybody is ready for the biggest and the hardest challenges on their first assignment. So let's work with people to get to where they're comfortable and proficient at their job to be able to be the lead and to be able to take on the bigger and more challenging things.
Rob Marino, Team 13, Safety. Newly retired as of 2021, so I'm new on being on incident management teams. You know, when I look at whenever something tries to get changed, I look at the type 1, type 2 IMT structure, and I go, very smart people created this and made it the way it is for a reason. And when you start trying to make things to a one-size-fits-all, it kind of ends up looking like a cheap suit. But that being said, what were the motives for creating this new structure, and are there any anticipated pitfalls or adverse effects that you're foreseeing?
Very smart people did create the current business model, but that was 4 decades ago. And our environment has changed dramatically in that 4 decades. We need a new business model that's better prepared to address the challenges of our current fire environment. The fires that Type 2 teams are being assigned to these days, 20 years ago would have been Type 1 fires. But we just keep pushing the envelope. And we need to adjust the model to meet what the environment is actually doing. If we don't deal with this, somebody else is gonna come behind us and have to do this. 15 years ago, there started being groups and recommendations formed on how to address these same challenges. IWDG has not been given a new challenge. We've been given a challenge that others before us were given as well. The difference is that the system is struggling even more now. So there is more acceptance and more acknowledgement that we need to do something. My challenge and my question back would be, if it's not this, then what is the right answer? What would you suggest that we do instead of or as part of the implementation of complex incident management? Because we cannot just keep doing what we've been doing. It's not going to work. It's not sustainable. 5 teams. We have lost 5 teams in the last year nationally. That is not a good trend. And we're down, I can't remember the exact numbers off the top of my head, but we're down like 15 over the last 20 years. That is not a sustainable push going forward. We cannot continue to ask more and more and more of people without doing something to change. What are the anticipated pitfalls? If I knew what all of those anticipated pitfalls were, we would plan to avoid them. So unfortunately, I don't know what all of them are, and that's where that feedback loop is so important. We need to hear what's working and what we can do differently to help make this implementation be successful. We're very optimistic that the model is the right model going forward. It's the pieces of it. What little pieces are potential pitfalls, and how can we overcome those to help the model be successful and be better? Anything?
Yeah, I think, Jesse talked about the environment has changed and also the workforces have changed. When you think about who comprised of our interagency teams 25, 30 years ago and who they're comprised of today, now it may be some of the exact same people, but in terms of the workforce, it's not the same, right? We in the federal agencies, we've talked about the loss of militia and that being at the quorum of our dilemmas, right? We don't have militia. Where's the militia? We've replaced the militia with more retirees and local government. And so that's how we've kept our numbers. So the demographics of our teams have changed because our workforces are not the same. So it's a combination of environment and workforce that really leads you to a path for change. And we've not done really well with that model to begin with. We may want to pat ourselves on the back, but the Type 2, Type 1 model was a secessional movement model. How many people have been on the same Type 2 team for more than 3 years in this room? Okay? I'm not even going to ask you to raise your name or your hands. I know how many. That's a failed secessional model, right? So we need a model that we can sustain. One that if it's I'm all in with this team, you can be all in with that team for perpetuity under this model. And so this is a path of a reflection of how we have done business to begin with. So we're adapting it to embrace something like that. So there's a multitude of reasons of the why, and we could go on and on and on, and it's a long list of whys. So, but hopefully, there's a few nuggets there to think about.
So it seems like all of your answers are coming back to we don't have enough people to fill teams, we're short teams. So I want to bring us back to Josh's comment. As long as I get paid more, 25% more in the backseat of an engine than I do as a section chief, it's an awful hard sell for me to recruit new people into the IMT world. And that's something that I don't know that we're going to fix anytime soon, but it sure does make it hard.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I'm done.
Okay, thank you. We acknowledge that. IFPM is another one of those hurdles that people have to moving into some of the other functional areas even. There are lots of challenges that are self-imposed through our agencies, and maybe with very good reasons, but they're still self-imposed upon us. And yes, we need to address incentives, we need to address pay. IWDG can't do that. We are continuing to push those conversations up to specifically to the Fire Management Board, because that's where those conversations have to happen, is with the policymakers, with the congressionals. One of the limitations IWDG has in those kinds of recommendations is that we are an intergovernmental composition. And so we can make a recommendation that might benefit one group, but not have any chance of success in the other groups. The differences between local government pay, the portal-to-portal question that came up with federal government policies, all of that is extremely challenging to get agreement on. And so the agencies are the ones who really need to address those pieces and components. We know that the Incident Business Committee, which establishes the AD pay plan, they've had conversations about how the AD pay plan affects all of this, how hazard pay affects all of this. And they are also very aware that those are some of the incentives and some of the roadblocks for people being on incident management teams or being in operational versus non-operational positions. And they're talking about what to do, how to make it better, how to get it all equal. There are recommendations to Congress on having set pay when you're on a wildland fire, regardless of your position, set pay rates. But until any of that is approved congressionally, IWDG can only say, this is a good idea and that's a good idea, or that's not, as opposed to being able to make any actual impact with it. But believe me, we agree. We need to do some different things in terms of pay and incentives as well.
Me again. So I understand and I get what you're saying about the unit chiefs, and that's a whole different discussion. But I do want to come back to that type 2 and the reason behind getting rid of it. And Mike touched on it a little bit with the succession planning there. From my position, when we go out on an assignment, we request type 2s to fill a particular role. Now, what you're going to be saying is, well, you're going to request a C to fill those particular roles. But I look at those type 2 teams, and I request type 2 positions, as I said, for certain roles. And from that, I hope to provide my type 1 trainees and then my type 1 people. I'm going to have to rethink how we do this for the future going forward. But the original question is, what was the thought process behind getting rid of type 2s?
Streamlining and flexibility. Streamlining that pathway to qualification and certification, reducing the layers of administrivia. So not necessarily the stepping stones of experience, that was not the intent, but reducing the layers of administrivia that contribute to all of that. And Mike said the piece about succession planning so well. I'm not going to repeat that, but that's a big part of it too. We shouldn't think that a complex trainee or a fully qualified complex can't fill that same role that you're describing in ordering a type 2. They can, they should, they will. They have to. That's what we have available now. Yes, the type 2 pathway was closed very suddenly without a lot of notice. that drives us forward into this transition and into this implementation. And so it is a really good thing for moving us forward and not continuing to perpetuate that old business model, but move forward, push into the new one, lean forward and embrace where we're going.
I had a question back here in the back. Shane Santos with the BIA. Hey, my question is, we're here this week collaborating with our counterparts, CAL FIRE, and CAL FIRE runs Type 1 incident management teams. So just asking what the reasoning, if there was regarding the name to changing from Type 1, Type 2 to complex incident management teams. Why didn't we go and mirror our partners and just call it Type 1 incident management teams?
We could have done that, certainly. But if we're going to create a new model and shift the perspective to a new model, new words help do that. If we continue to call it Type 1, we continue to perpetuate the old model, which has its benefits and has its challenges. But IWDG's recommendation was to move in a new direction, create new language to describe what we're doing. People know what Type 1 teams are, they know what Type 1 qualifications are, so there would be advantages to sticking with that word. But then come those questions of, well, so you skip from Type 3 to Type 1, and we had those what ifs, and the challenge that creates just conceptually, the familiarity with the processes and the systems and the model, putting a new name on it, creating a new pathway, pointing out that this is not the same as Type 1. Complex incident management is not Type 1. It's different. It's, as many have said, it's better because it creates that flexibility within the naming process and the business model as well.
So how are we measuring success around our transition? And how do we know that this is the solution to the problem and not creating any more additional problems? And is there going to be a trigger point that says, hey, this isn't working? Let's go back to what has been working.
Last fall, we had an after-action review in Boise with the members of IWDG, with the members of the Fire Management Board, of NMAC, of NWCG, of some of the Rocky Mountain area team and leadership who had been the first ones to pilot complex incident management. And then with the Incident Position Standards Committee under NWCG, which establishes the PMS 310-1. And we talked about, even in the small pilot that was accomplished last year within Rocky Mountain and a little bit in the Northern Rockies and the Southern area, what worked well? What were the unseen gaps? How can we continue to improve and move forward going into 2023 as the transition year? And those notes to that AAR are available on the IWDG webpage too, if you want to see those, if you're interested. But we identified what those pieces were that we could improve for this year and beyond. And we made those adjustments and have adjusted some of our plans and processes based on that. We're going to do that exact same thing this fall with broader transition, with broader participation as CIMs. We're going to do the exact same thing, have another AAR and talk about what worked, what we need to adjust, how we can continue to improve this model and not just keep plugging forward, assuming and hoping that it's all going to work, because neither of those are good plans. How can we actually be adaptive? Our goal, our vision is to continue to improve, continue to move forward, and to do so recognizing that this is not a perfect plan, but that we can continue to improve it and be adaptable and be flexible as an organization to get it to the right point. We may have to make some other adjustments. We may have to make adjustments in timeline, in products, in expectations, but to continue to do that collectively and move forward to get us to the right place, not to put a foot on the brake, but to ease off the gas and figure out which lane we need to be in and how we need to get there the right way.
Jesse, Dusty Martin here in the back of the room. Question I have is, you talked about challenges, and one of the things I see for my my partners in the room here is with the roster going to 35, and I agree, Mike, it has to be scalable, but our environment is changing, and so has there been discussions about the length of time it's going to take to assume command with a 35-person roster and then having to go out and IROC and fill those other positions as our fire environment is changing, and we're asking the teams to take command in a much more rapid fashion, but now we're also going to be asking them to go negotiate and then try and fill the IROC orders and get those positions. So has there been talk at your guys' level about delaying the transfer of command, which then inevitably puts more stress on the home units, home forests, that the teams are getting called to come and stand up and support. But that's one of the challenges that I see, is having to fill IROC orders at the time of negotiation and then really get the personnel to the incident to assume command. And have you guys had discussions about that and the length of time that's going to take?
Not within how quickly teams should take command of the incident, no, because that decision needs to lie with the IC and the team and with the host agency to negotiate that. We should not, from the national level, be saying you should take it right away or you should take it in 2 days or anything in between. That conversation needs to happen on that level based on the incident needs. And then I want to reiterate that where those additional people come from is not hard and fast guidance right now. Yeah, some of them may need to come from IROC, but I don't think it's the expectation of the CWCG that all of those people come from IROC. And so what is that plan for how you get those people? Are they on your blacklist and they know that you're going to be calling them as soon as you get that order and they're available and you've already greased all those skids? And maybe there's just a couple of people that you need to pull from IROC. So because that's the way we all see the plan going, there is no expectation that that we need to say how quickly or slowly a team needs to transition and assume command of an incident. The other piece of that that I want to say we have talked about is how to provide surge capacity support to an incident. Like, let's say there's a rapid scale up and you did go with less than the total of 90 people because it was a less complex incident when you were ordered. Now it's expanding, now it's increasing, and you need extra people and you need them fast. Well, as opposed to being able to snap your fingers and have them there, what could we do to help you until they can get there? Utilizing virtual support, utilizing surge capacity modules that could be like a quick response, short duration need for personnel. And we've talked about that in a lot of the functional areas. Logistics, what if we had a module within a geographic area that could be there for 3 or 4 days, help set up, or be there for 3 or 4 days to help tear down an ICP? But they're not all the extra hands that you need over the full duration of the incident. Same with finance. Maybe you need a few people for a couple of days to help demobilize a whole bunch of contract resources, but it's a short duration, high need event. And how can we systemically create those models and resources to help support the team, but not have to be on the incident all the time, full duration with the team?
I'll add something on this one. So this to me is, of all the things that we're rolling out, this question right here is the one that I think will evolve with time. The good news is we have a lot of discretion with this. And as whether it's the 2 geographic areas or within the coordination group, these interagency teams work for the coordination group, and we have some decision space, and there's nothing to say that we couldn't make a decision that says, look, in California, mobilizations aren't going to go out the door with less than 60. We have discretionary space for that. We could do that. Is that the right thing to do to make sure we're maximizing efficiencies with scalability? I don't know the answer to that. We haven't thoroughly had that conversation. But we do have discretion with this question of scalability and the ordering of teams, because that's a real concern. If we're talking about scaling an incident up, we need to go heavier. If we're passing it between teams, that's two ICs having a conversation. What have you had? What do I need to bring? And if we're ramping it down, we should be in fact ramping it down, right? So those are the different stages within an incident that we do have some discretion as geographic areas and a coordination group to set some minimum standards that apply for mobilizations with our teams within California. Nationally, we're playing by the national rule set. So this is a place that I think we will learn and grow. And we haven't even made a decision within our transition plan of what our starting point's going to look like. So it's a good question, and I think one of the more interesting ones to develop as we transition through this.
Hey, Mike, real quick. So I'm now really confused because I just asked if we had discretion within the GAC to mob outside or more than 35, and the answer was no.
So no nationally. That's a national. Within the GAC.
I didn't ask nationally. I said within the GAC, can we mob with more than 35? And the answer was no. And then you just said, hey, we have discretion to mob with more than 35. So it's not being clear.
Core roster versus mobilization, I think, is the difference there. The core roster is 35, and that part is not discretionary. The total mobilization could be between that 35 and 90, depending on that negotiation and depending upon the incident needs. Is that the clarification that's needed?
Hi, Stephanie Bishop, Team 4. To go off of what my IC was talking about on measuring success, and you brought up Rocky Mountain. This is California. I'm just going to say that. So how are you going to measure the success of California? Because it's completely different here with politics and media and everything based off of that. And we've had it in the past where we've had some teams come in and help manage some of the fires from out of region, and they've had some issues and concerns and problems. How is that going to be now that we're elevating some of those type 2 teams that haven't been into California yet, that are now Cs coming in to manage teams in California? How are we going to measure the success there and how it's working or not working in California?
So the reason Rocky Mountain was at that AAR is because Rocky Mountain was the only one to pilot it completely last year. That's why my emphasis was on them. All of those other people who were in that AAR, representing NMAC, representing the Fire Management Board, representing IWDG, people like Mike were involved in that too. So it was not a Rocky Mountain AAR, it was a very collective AAR that included the very specific pieces that came out of Rocky Mountain. This year, as we continue the transition, we're going to be involving more people in that conversation and feedback because of the expanded nature of the transition. And I'll let Mike speak to California specifically.
Yeah, so it depends on the metrics in which we're going to use for success, right? Let's just take transitions, for example. If one of our metrics is fewer transitions, then I think we all probably have a pretty good indication of how successful that's going to be when we're not having to move between type 2s and 1s anymore. And so we'll have to look at a number of different metrics. Some of those will be a bit more subjective than others. We'll try and pick as objective a measures as possible as we're looking at those things. But there's a multitude of things. And I don't, at least I'm not aware of a specific set of metrics that we've even discussed yet in the coordination group. Nationally, it's a little bit different story, as Jesse indicated with the AAR process that we went through. And so some of that we'll have to define.
Would team assessments based off of what we're being evaluated on be looked at a little bit more?
Most likely, okay. Yeah, and that's a question unto itself. Does that how much do those IMT evaluations need to change? Do they need to change? That's a sensitive subject depending upon who you talk to, because there are some national standard formats that geographic area by geographic area may or may not use those. And so as a team from California that gets evaluated one way in California and some way entirely different when we go out of state, personally, I've never liked that. I've never been a fan of that, and whether or not we'll tackle and wrestle that one to the ground through the CIM transition will kind of be yet to be seen here. But yeah, I'm sure that IMT evaluations are going to be a component of it, and feedback from the agencies that use these teams, the agency leaders that order these teams and use them and watch them perform. I mean, their feedback's going to be critical. They're the ones that are directly dealing with the political influences and the questions and the issues that will come up on that end. And so their standards for measurement of how we perform through this transition will be key.
Question, you talk about scalability and you have the roster at 35. Why couldn't it be rostered at 70? And based on what the incident needs, then the IC can decide how many people off of that roster need to be rolled out. And I ask this because there are departments, I'm local government, there are departments out there that if you're not rostered, don't even ask to go out. If you're rostered, things may be tight, but if you're on the roster, they want to support the team, so they'll send you out with your team. Was that ever considered?
It was, yes. And what is consistently acknowledged is that we as teams are not good at scaling down. We can scale up, we can bring more, we're not good at scaling down when the incident needs it. And so the rationale was to start lower and build up, recognizing that most incidents need more than 35 people, but how those 35 people are built is the key, not automatically bringing all 100 people. I liked how Mike said it. We know all incidents need a number, we just don't know what the number is. So building those positions, building that mobilization roster to meet the needs of the incident when it occurs. And again, thinking nationally, thinking globally here, as we consider the difference in geographic areas, there are going to be incidents in some geographic areas that will only need 35 people on a low end. Recognizing that other incidents, other geographic areas, California is probably in that other end, where more often than not, you're gonna need all the people, but building the right roster for the incident, not just a roster for every incident. That's the difference there. And we've got time for one more question if there are any more. Yes.
Hi, Carlton Joseph, Deputy IC with California Team 1. I'd like to hear a report out on the California's progress towards CIMT. This is something that's been going on for a couple of years now. The number of incidents and the complexity that we've been faced with here in California the past couple of years. How come the teams haven't jumped in? Where are the type 2 teams at right now? And why hasn't California, I guess, embraced this and waiting till 2024?
I'm still trying to recover from hearing you say you're on Team 1, Carlton, so I'm getting past that.
I get it.
So we have had tracking spreadsheets on where our qualified type 2 folks are, how many of those have had 520 and can pass through the portal to CIM, and also how many we've gotten field evaluations conducted for. So I don't recall off the top of my head exactly what the numbers were for that, Carlton, but I can tell you that the gap that's left right now of qualified type 2 people that haven't been to 520 or haven't had a field evaluation is pretty darn small in California. There's really not a tremendous number of people left in that. We've gotten a lot of folks done, but I think part of what we have to not lose sight of is in California, we started, if y'all remember, about 5 years ago, we started really pushing hard towards moving our teams towards type 1. So we started to really ramp up participation in SIMCs and 520s and sending people. And we also started making a lot more concerted effort to bring in NEMO teams to train folks, have shadow teams. McGowan went and shadowed a team. I mean, we were kind of on this pathway for quite a long time before we officially saw a CIM eval form. So, you know, we've had the CIM eval forms now for a couple of years, and or last year, this is our second year, and we made a bunch more headway with several of the Type 2 teams last year. So that gap, the last time I saw that spreadsheet, and I think the Gators were maintaining that for us, it's pretty small. I mean, we don't have a tremendous number of folks left on the Type 2 teams that need to do 520 or get the field eval. There are still some out there, and we recognize that. But like Jesse mentioned, we've got this coming field season, and we've got into next field season to continue to close that gap. And the eval process is, you know, intended to not be invasive, relatively quick, and be an opportunity for some dialogue and a little bit of feedback, and really just kind of an assessment. It's an evaluation is what it is. So not a whole lot of people are not coming out of the other end of that. There are some, but for the most part, we've had a pretty high success rate of once we have evaluators in place, being able to get the majority of all those people through that funnel in like a 3 to 5 day time period in most cases. But the other thing that we kind of have the advantage of in California is we've got so much experience on our Type 2 teams. You know, we haven't even talked about the risk associated to incident complexity and team typing that we've been sustaining for years in California. And do we have the right type team on the right incident that day, right? But we know our Type 2 teams have been exercised, all of them, on really complicated incidents. And so a lot of these people we're evaluating have been through the ringer on incidents, and they've been a part of high-functioning teams for a while. So getting them through the eval has not proved to be very difficult so far. That said, we recognize there could be some folks that are pretty new in their positions and do need a little more coaching, and that's a part of what that eval process can consist of, is some coaching and mentoring. So it's a small gap, though, Carlton. There's not a ton of people left that haven't been able to get through that funnel yet.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Mike's saying. Small gap, and we'll look to get that information out through CWCG, and it shouldn't be a heavy lift to do that.
I really want to thank everybody for the conversation this morning. I didn't realize how much time we had taken until I glanced at my watch and Annalee, but I really appreciate the openness and the discussion, and we'll be around throughout the day to have any follow-up or additional questions with you. So thank you very, very much.
I want to reiterate what Jesse just said. I too appreciate the level of questions that were asked of our speakers this morning, and a sincere appreciation to Jesse and to Mike for standing up here for 2 hours and fielding the many questions from this group. I know that there are more questions out there, are concerns out there, and like Mike said, we are still working through how this is going to be implemented in California and that transition plan. So for the CWCG teams, please continue to have this dialogue and work through your incident commanders so that they can report up to CWCG operations as well as the CWCG executive group. So as these transition plans are developed, we can take in all of this feedback along with the agency administrators. If there's concerns that you have, please get those up through your representatives at CWCG executives so that they can be included in the vetting process as these documents are developed and the transition is solidified. So with that, we are going to break until 10:30. When we get back from break, we have 2 speakers that will be filling out the rest of the morning. So I just ask that everyone please are back in their seats for respect to those speakers by 10:30. Thank you.
Okay, if we could start making our way back to our seats. For folks in the hallway, if you could start making your way back to your seats, we have our next guest speaker coming up. I believe they have it. Yeah, I believe the gadget's right there. Great point, Sheriff. Great point. I think we need you up here to make them get in their seats. Okay, everyone, please make your way to your seats. We're a couple minutes behind already. All right, our next guest speaker is Sheriff Corey Hanea, and he's the Butte County Sheriff, and he's also the president of the California Sheriff's Association, and he's going to be here speaking with us about that association.
Good morning, everyone. And as you heard, my name is Corey Honey, and I'm the Sheriff of Butte County. And I am the president of the California State Sheriff's Association, but I'm not here to talk to you about the California State Sheriff's Association. I am here on behalf of the California Sheriff's Association to make a very important request. I want to tell you just a little bit about why I'm here to make this request, and the fact that I think I have some relevant experience that enables me to make this request and hopefully inspire you to the vision of accommodating this request. I'm the Sheriff of Butte County, and Butte County has certainly seen its fair share of disasters, requiring coordination between local law enforcement, local fire, local EMS, and CAL FIRE's incident management teams. That's where I have the vast majority of my experience interacting with incident management teams. And a lot of that was interacting with incident management teams 3 and 4. Just by quick show of hands, where are my team 3, 4 people? We have a few. Oh, there we go. Hello, guys. Good to see you all again. Yes, exactly. And of that, how many federal teams are here? Just you? Oh, a few of you? It was interesting when I came up here. He said to be back at 10:30, and then he got up here and he started asking people, please sit down, please sit down. And I asked, do firefighters always listen that well, or is it something? Because I would have said, get in here and sit your asses down. It's time for us to get going, because the longer you're here, the longer we'll be here at the end of the day, right? And we don't want that. So I've got 30 minutes to make this request and hopefully inspire you to accommodate the request. And for those of you who have worked with me in Team 3 and Team 4, you will acknowledge or be able to acknowledge that it takes a lot for me to come up here and say, I'd like you to accommodate a request, right? Because oftentimes after asking, if I don't get what I'm looking for, I tend to get a little more direct, right? The California State Sheriff's Association really started looking at this issue, and the issue was our coordination with and cooperation with incident management teams. And it came as a result of the Dixie Fire, actually on the heels of the North Complex and Bear Fire, and then the Dixie Fire. And we formed a committee within the California State Sheriff's Association because there was a high degree of frustration that sheriffs throughout the state of California were experiencing when they were dealing primarily with the federal teams. I will tell you that we have, at least in my view, a very good working relationship with the CAL FIRE incident management teams. They, by and large, are already inspired to the vision of working closely with local law enforcement, and that's my request, that we work better together with the incident management teams and local law enforcement, and I'll explain why here in a moment. Let's see if I can work this. Perhaps not. Oh, point it down there. Oh, look at that. Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. See, that's a good example of cooperation right there. See that? I was struggling and you helped me out. I appreciate that. So, why is cooperation with local law enforcement imperative? And I'm going to define what I mean by local law enforcement. Generally speaking, I'm talking about the local county sheriff or the local chiefs of police if the incident that you're managing happens to intersect with those individuals as well. I know that the federal agencies have often law enforcement agents or officers that work with them. But it's imperative that you work with local law enforcement because we have knowledge of the communities, the terrain, and the roadways outside of the federal jurisdiction that your federal law enforcement officers often don't have. And I heard somebody talking earlier about this being California, and California's a little different. We also have a better understanding of the political landscape that we're operating in and that you're operating in, as well as the media that's going to be dealing with these incidents. And I think that that by itself would probably save us a lot of headache if we work better together. Local law enforcement maintains infrastructure and systems used to alert and warn people. Local law enforcement coordinates law enforcement mutual aid and evacuations and the security of those areas that are evacuated. We do that in conjunction with our partners at the Governor's Office of Emergency Service. And I want to acknowledge Don O'Keefe, the chief of the Division of Law Enforcement, because he has worked very closely with the California State Sheriff's Association to enhance our mutual aid response to these kinds of situations. Local law enforcement coordinates with entities that provide sheltering. Local law enforcement is responsible for the security of the evacuated areas and the traffic control points, and local law enforcement plays a critical role in repopulation. Now, as I said earlier, we probably have more experience working with the CAL FIRE incident management teams, and we've been able to work through a lot of these and really develop good working relationships, probably because CAL FIRE makes up the local fire departments or the county fire departments in a good number of the counties throughout the state of California. And they tend to have jurisdiction over areas that have greater or higher levels of populated areas. And so there's the need to coordinate in terms of alert and warning evacuations. But as we see bigger and bigger fires throughout the state of California, moving from federal lands onto off of federal lands and into areas where they're populated, it mandates that we get better at cooperating with everyone. So I know that this sounds very basic, and I certainly don't mean to portray it in a really basic manner or offend anybody, but I do want to lay out what I think our roles are. And the first one I'll go through is fire. And from our view in law enforcement, the responsibility of the fire is to put out there we go, thank you. Put out the fire. For the love of everything that is holy and sacred, please just put the damn fire out. And I will tell you that statement, there's a lot of frustration behind that statement because our perception among California state sheriffs is, especially on federal land, that there is a tendency to let fires just go and watch them, and if they're in remote areas, and we recognize that it's tough sometimes to put fires out in remote areas. But I speak from experience, particularly with the North Complex fire and the Bear Fire that burned for weeks and weeks and weeks outside of my county. And on the day that it burned into my county, the team, so a federal team that was managing it, was trying to figure out who to call in my office to let us know that it was coming to Butte County. The problem is it was already in Butte County, and it was moving into a populated area. We were significantly behind the eight ball because there was a lack of coordination. And unfortunately, 16 people died as a result of that fire. Now, I will say that a good number of those people knew the fire was coming because we were able to get somewhat ahead of the curve with regard to alert and warnings, and they chose to stay, which is part of human behavior, and I'll talk a moment about that. But certainly, I think that where we started really sensing the frustration. And then in the Dixie fire, there was some more frustration. So, obviously, putting out the fire is what we're hoping that you'll do. You hope you'll be able to do that before it ever gets to a populated area. But we need to know where the fire is going and how fast it's going to be there. We need to know what the threat is that fire poses, particularly to populated areas, and when that threat is reduced or passed so that we can make appropriate adjustments. And ultimately, we need to coordinate with repopulation, and that becomes a big, big issue. The moment that we evacuate, repopulation becomes an issue for us, and I'll explain a little bit in a moment about that. The role of law enforcement, our view is we're here to determine when warnings and evacuation orders should be issued based upon information that we receive from the fire side. And we spend a lot of time thinking about how we're going to message those warnings, when we should put out warnings, and then from there, whether we need to elevate them to orders. It seems like a relatively simple thing, but I will tell you there's a great deal of complexity in that. In addition to that, once we've figured that out, our job is to issue those warnings. Then we have to coordinate the evacuations, and then we have to provide security in the areas that we've evacuated, and then, as I said earlier, start working on the repopulation. Now, alert and warning may seem like a really simple thing. If you talk to anybody from the LA Times, they're going to go, "What's the problem, Sheriff?" All you got to do is just tell people to get out, and then they'll get out. But it's not quite that simple. The fact of the matter is, alert and warning requires a concerted effort. We have built an entire mechanism around alert and warnings. And what we've learned is you have to message as early as possible and as often as possible across multiple platforms, because nobody listens to the same platform. And what are those platforms? Well, those platforms include door-to-door evacuations, where a uniformed law enforcement officer, if there's time available, goes to the door and tells the person what the threat is and what the response should be. But sometimes there's no time for that, so then we have to use technology like our emergency mass notification systems, or we have to use traditional media or social media, or use the iPause system. But inevitably, no matter what you do, you won't be able to reach everybody. That's been our experience. And you'll be criticized heavily, or rather we will be criticized heavily no matter what we do with regard to that. But you have to message across multiple platforms. The other thing that we've come to realize is that no matter what you say in terms of messaging, there will be people who don't listen to you. They won't heed the warning, and they become a problem for us later on. Evacuations. Once we have ordered the evacuation, then we have to send law enforcement personnel into those areas to coordinate that evacuation. As I said earlier, the best way to thank you for helping me out there. The best way to get somebody to evacuate is for a uniformed law enforcement officer to knock on their door, tell them what the threat is, and tell them what the response to the threat is. The problem is when you have a rapidly evolving event, you may not be able to send law enforcement officers to every single door. You may not have enough resources, and the Camp Fire was an excellent example of that. My belief is there wasn't enough fire engines and there wasn't enough cops in probably the entirety of Northern California to get ahead of that fire as fast as it moved through. We would not have been able to get to everybody's door and alert them. And then if we had mass congestion and gridlock as it was. But if that doesn't work, there's a host of other things that we have to do. And we implemented a high-low siren system where we drive through and we've messaged to our communities what that means. And we use all of our other platforms, the emergency mass notification systems, social media and traditional media and sirens and all those kinds of things. There's a whole lot of other considerations that we have to take into account. It's not just you tell us, hey, go alert and warn these people and evacuate, and they're all going to leave. We have to also account for populations that may have difficult times evacuating. You have people with disabilities, or they don't have a means of transportation. We have to accommodate that. The unhoused population is now a situation where we have to contend with alerting those folks, warning them, and then providing ways for them to get out of the area, because oftentimes they don't. And then animals. Animals become a big deal. I will tell you that sometimes people get more upset when animals die than when people die, right? And sometimes people will fight us or want to fight us if we tell them they have to leave their animal behind, but they won't fight us nearly as hard if we tell them that they have to leave their brother-in-law behind, although we would never do that, right? Yeah. But you can imagine that becomes a big issue for us. And in the Bear Fire, the North Complex Fire, this was another bone of contention or area of conflict between locals and the federal team that were running it, because we had cattle ranchers who had thousands of head of cattle up in those areas that had been burned. And as soon as the fire had gone through there, they were trying to get into the area to do what they could to save any of the cattle that may have lived through that. And I had one rancher, as a matter of fact, you may have read a rather lengthy article that he penned. It has been well publicized. His name is Dave Daly. And he expressed a great deal of frustration when he called the Forest Service and was passed around and told it would be weeks before he would be allowed in to assess what was going on with his cattle and determine if any of them could be saved. And as you know, weeks go by and all those cattle are going to be dead. And so he called me, and I, through our law enforcement channels, arranged for him and his crew to get up in there and go there. Did that come with risk? It did come with risk. It ultimately resulted in us developing the Ag Pass program, which is a successful program. But the fact of the matter is, you need the local connection and local law enforcement to coordinate that, because it's never going to look good when a rancher gets on TV and says, yeah, they wouldn't let me in to get my cattle for 3 weeks, and they're all dead, and I could have saved some of them. Interestingly enough, I've been in contact with the Tulare County Sheriff over the last week, and I think there's is it IMT3 that is helping with the flood there? Yeah. And my understanding is that they evacuated 30,000 dairy cows. Is that? Yeah. So that becomes a big deal for us. Once we evacuate an area, then law enforcement has to provide for the security of that area. You can't tell people, leave everything of value in your home and get the hell out, and then not take some measure to protect it. And so that requires a significant mutual aid response. And we need to understand what that mutual aid response is going to be well in advance, because it could take us, up to 12 hours or longer to order the resources that we need into the area so that we can get the cops there and the units there to not only deal with the security issues, but also the traffic control issues. The next issue, unfortunately, and I've had a good deal of experience with this, tragically, is the search for human remains. And the Camp Fire, which I think still stands as the deadliest fire in the history of the state of California, and hopefully it is never surpassed. Ultimately, we had to coordinate the search of 27,000 structures, ultimately, any place where a human being could have taken shelter. For human remains. And in the end, 85 people perished in that fire, and the remains of those individuals had to be recovered by our staff. That was a whole operation in and of itself, but it required a lot of cooperation between us and the fire side. As a matter of fact, I think that was the first time there had been resources developed or put towards law enforcement through the through the system that California has with regard to activating its incident management teams and paying for it. In the North Complex fire, as I said earlier, there were 16 human beings that lost their lives, and we had to coordinate the search for those individuals. And then there's repopulation. And I want to tell you, and you probably understand this, but because law enforcement are the ones that kick people out and keep them out, the pressure is on us very intensely. The moment, literally the moment that you order the evacuation of an area, there is somebody putting pressure on you to let them back in. And the pressure is everybody from the person who lives in the house that you've told them to leave to their senator or their congressman or somebody else in the entire spectrum. And that's something that we have to manage and we have to work with, but it's an important thing for you to understand because we need to have some cooperation between law enforcement side and what's going on, understand the threats, understand when repopulation would go, what would be appropriate. And I think that only works when we have that close connection and close cooperation on those issues. There's a lot of politics surrounding that. So I know I had 30 minutes, and I didn't want to blow past my time. So I'm going to reiterate what my request is. And my request is, and I will tell you, I've had really good working relationships and good success with the CAL FIRE incident teams that I've worked with, teams 3 and 4 in particular. They embedded our law enforcement, local law enforcement, into the process early on. They didn't just treat us as a cooperator and ask us to come to the cooperator meeting and expect that coordination. We had people embedded within them, and we worked all of these issues early on. In many cases, we were able to get the information, the intel that we had early on in order to make the good decisions and manage the chaos that we were dealing with. I'm hoping that we can achieve that same kind of level with the federal teams. And I recognize that federal teams come from out of California. Maybe they don't understand the landscape in California. I can appreciate that. But that's an even greater reason to include us and bring us in and work cooperatively with us early on so that we can help navigate the local issues and navigate the political issues. And but more importantly, I think it will reduce our conflict. And you have to be aware that there's been conflict between law enforcement and federal teams in particular. It will serve our communities better, and I honestly believe that it will save lives. So I think if by my time I was supposed to stop at 11, if anybody has any questions, I'm willing to take them. If you disagree with me, you're wrong, and I'll fight you in the hallway if you'd like. See, it came out. I couldn't keep it, right? I couldn't keep it in, right? But at any rate, I do want to recognize and thank the organizers of this for the opportunity to come and really plead our case and really talk about how important it is for us to get better at what we're doing because, again, lives are at stake. So with that, if there are no questions, I'll get off the stage and you can have your next presenter. We'll go from there. Thank you. Oh, yeah. I think thank you. Were you raising your hand for a question, or are you just like, hey, I need a cup of coffee over here? Which? Yeah. Oh, bring the mic up.
Thank you. Good morning, Sheriff. Dave Pender, CAL FIRE Team 4, the liaison for CAL FIRE Team 4. Good to see you.
Good seeing you, sir. Especially under these circumstances.
Yeah, much better circumstances.
Yeah.
One of the biggest challenges we have from incident management teams, with CAL FIRE in particular, I know some of the federal partners, we've had the same discussion, is trying to get agencies, law enforcement agencies, to provide or encourage their folks to join the teams as law enforcement liaisons.
Correct.
As you know, you're intimately aware of it. It helps us a great deal. They are intimately aware of your challenges, and as we talk about, they speak cop. They know how to interact properly with your agencies. What are your suggestions, or what's being done on the law enforcement side with your association side to help encourage some of the agencies that are out there to give their folks to their time and to participate with the teams to help, bridge some of those concerns that you brought up, which are real concerns?
Yeah, that's a great question. I appreciate it. And As you may or may not be aware, one of my sergeants is serving on one of the teams right now. I fully support that. I see the value of it, having the experience that I've had. You're absolutely right. Even if it's a local law enforcement officer, not from your particular jurisdiction, they still speak our language, and we can, they can pierce the bureaucratic wall that you often need to pierce to get to the decision makers with local. So huge proponent of that. I'd love to see the federal teams adopt a similar model of that, especially from a California standpoint. That said, I think two things. One is, and if my perception is incorrect, I'll be happy to have it revised, but you all just don't accept anybody we send, right? The fact is, my understanding is that you have to be asked to join the team. It's a pretty big honor to be selected to be a law enforcement member of one of the teams. And so I think that from that standpoint, at least from CAL FIRE, we are under the impression that we kind of have to wait until you tell us you want to incorporate one of our individuals there, because it takes a special skill set, right? It takes a certain kind of skill set. But beyond that, I do think that getting sheriffs in particular to have a better understanding of what the teams do, then they'll see the value of that. And I would say that unfortunately, given the significant number of incidents that have had to be managed in the state of California over the last few years between fires and floods and whatever else, potential dam breaks, all those kinds of things. More and more sheriffs have a better understanding of that, and I'm hoping that that will accelerate their involvement. But if it doesn't, I think perhaps getting you guys to come and talk to our sheriffs and explain what you do in a time when we're not in the middle of a crisis would be a value. But I think that's and I support that wholeheartedly.
Yeah, and that's a great point in that the challenge is, so there might be a disconnect as well, which is to be expected in many of the things we do is we do go out and we reach out, but it seems as though it's not necessarily pushback, but it's a little bit of resistance.
Okay.
And I think oftentimes it's because it's just a lack of awareness on what's being expected, and it's probably poor communication on our part many times on what we're looking for. So, and also the separation of time. Some agencies or regions, if they haven't had a large event, it's just not necessarily on the forefront of their concern.
Sure.
So the question is, specifically, when your associations get together, is it being discussed from folks like you who have such recent and difficult situations? Is it being talked about, and is it being encouraged to your partners to say, hey, look, here's a great opportunity for your organization to get involved and to be advocates of your agencies and of your process to get involved? So as we go out, and I'll speak for my experience, I've gone to lots of agencies just looking for participation. And oftentimes, again, it's lack of awareness, and it's going to be a process to bridge those gaps of misunderstanding. But it's a great idea, but we understand there's staffing issues. All agencies, whether it's fire, law, staffing and attrition, and just being able to provide people is a challenge, especially for smaller agencies. But it just seems like there's that component of they don't quite understand, which we can do better on communicating. We're just hoping that from the law side, the people like you can get that message out to them and say, hey, look, you can really make a difference for your community and to help with this, and also to advocate for what your needs are. I think it would be a big help.
You are 100% correct, and I agree with you. I think you're right. I think there is the concern, hey, this person could be gone for weeks at a time, and that's possible, right? And if I'm a smaller agency and I have to backfill, my view of it certainly has evolved over the course of a couple of years, and it's evolved directly because of my close working relationship with CAL FIRE Incident Management Teams that I mentioned before. And I recognize that, one, I've been a massive consumer of mutual aid in my career as sheriff, right? So I'm trying to give back to the world, and that's one way to do that. But secondly, I recognize that the training and experience that my law enforcement staff member gets when they're a member of that team is really incredible. And that training experience can be applied to a whole host of other situations that maybe don't involve the IMT, but law enforcement missions and things of that nature. And so that's where I see the value. With regard to spreading the word or getting my colleagues inspired to that, I will tell you that this particular, the committee that brought me here, which was the State Sheriff's Wildfire Committee, our first goal was to, one, get a fund established similar to what fire has with regard to law enforcement mutual aid, and through the assistance of the Governor's Office of Emergency Services, we were able to do that. So that goal has been achieved. Number two was to be able to talk directly to incident management teams and ask that we work on our coordination. So that's been done. And now I think I have goal three, so I'll start working that angle right there. Fair enough? All right, I think my time is up. Thank you all very much. I appreciate the opportunity. You guys have a great conference.
Great, thank you, Sheriff. Thank you so much for your time this morning, and also excellent question, so thank you. So next up, I would like to welcome Matt Diaz. Matt is the president and the CEO of the California Forestry Association, which is also referred to as Cal Forests. And so Matt is going to talk to us a little bit this morning about Cal Forests and how their representation of private industry in California also has an impact on our incident management teams. Welcome, Matt.
Good morning. It's still before the noon hour, so good morning, everybody. Good morning. My name is Matt Diaz. I am the president of the California Forestry Association. And I walked into this morning about, 8:30 or 9 o'clock, and the first thing I recognized is that I was significantly overdressed for the event. Not too many ties out there, but nonetheless, my chosen attire today comes from the deep respect that I wanted to display to you all today as it relates to the fire protection system in California. Both federal, state, local cooperators are so important. And I just want to recognize the level of service that you provide to the state of California, as well as to the forest product sector. And I want to give a brief background of who Cal Forests is, and I'm going to give a brief background of myself as well. It's really important actually to always know your audience. Like, how many folks in here are Forest Service, federal partners, BIA, Park Service, and how many Cal Fire in general? How many local? So pretty good mixed bag. For me, an important aspect of it is Northern and Southern California. How many folks are, if you drew a line from San Francisco Bay essentially to Yosemite, how many people north of Northern California, north of that line? Meaning that there's a lot of people south of that line. So there's a lot of folks in California, I would suggest not as many in this room, but a lot of folks in California don't really recognize that there is a robust timber industry in California. It has been for decades, centuries, actually. And Cal Forest as an association represents that industry, that forest product sector. In total, again, looking kind of from the Santa Cruz County area over to Yosemite and north, cumulatively, we represent about 3.5 million acres, and all of the primary manufacturing facilities, or nearly all the primary manufacturing facilities in California. And in addition to that, our mission is really often focused on legislative and administrative regulatory actions that are underway, if you will. In this venue, it's very different. As we all know, the wildfire crisis in California has been absolutely daunting, and it's getting worse. Doesn't seem to be getting better quite yet. And the impacts to the impacts to the forest product sector have been dramatic. Before I get into it too deeply, just a little bit about myself. So I'm a graduate of Humboldt State University, graduated in 1999. Anybody else from Humboldt State University at all? Go Lumberjacks. There's not very many of us, but I am a graduate in 1999, and I worked in the field as a professional forester for about half of my career, about 13 years or so. I'm now approaching 25 years in the forestry world, if you will. And the second half of my career has been more focused on policy and regulation. I actually staffed the State Board of Forestry and Fire Protection for about 10 years. and was in a leadership role for about 7, where I was fortunate enough to build a very strong relationship with CAL FIRE. in Sacramento for the most part. I have a lot of friends and colleagues that work amongst all the cooperators here. But again, my history was about 12 years in the field, 12 years in policy and regulation, and I've been in this current role for about a year and a half. I worked a significant portion of my career in Santa Cruz County, northern Santa Cruz County and southern San Mateo County. And during that time, the wildfire crisis became very clear in Santa Cruz County. And it started, although wildfires have been an issue in Santa Cruz off and on, it really started in 2009 with the Lockheed complex. And in today's world, that was only a 9,000 acre fire. It was pretty small. But it burned, it burned not only in stand types, timber types, if you will, that we would never have thought would have burned to the intensity that they did. During that time, obviously my family was evacuated, so on and so forth. And then not only 10 years later, that same footprint, along with an additional 70,000 acres burned, including Big Basin State Park. And during that fire, the home in which I raised my family in was incinerated, as well as all of the community around. It was a very rural community north of Davenport, but friends, colleagues, co-workers all lost their homes in that, as well as the land base that supported that community was significantly hit. Fortunately, the mill that was present there in Davenport survived due to rapid deployment of tactics as it relates to IMT decisions, and thank God that sawmill survived. CalForest is, in this day and age of the wildfire crisis, CalForest is doing the best, along with our partners here, to try to support all of the fire protection personnel in California, including the IMTs. We do that in a myriad of ways, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a moment. Most notably, I don't know how many folks here are following the recent lawsuit that was filed that was trying to enjoin the use of retardants by the Forest Service. Is anybody familiar with that particular lawsuit? Maybe or maybe not. It's a lawsuit that was recently filed in federal court in the state of Montana, essentially trying to compel the courts to remove that tool from the toolbox. And CalForest, with the mere risk of that occurring, CalForest has leaned in and is intervening in that lawsuit, trying to persuade the courts to allow that tool to still be an allowed practice for the Forest Service, and most notably for us, Region 5. So impacts from wildfire on the forest product sector. In the last 4 years, we've lost 400,000 acres to wildfire, approximately, give or take. And along with that, the communities that surround these acres that are lost have also been impacted. And we could go down the list: outskirts of Santa Rosa, Redding, Hornbrook, Greenville, Swanton, my old community, Bonnie Doon. There's a myriad of them, right? Every year there's another community lost. One of the issues that we're facing, I believe, is that it's really important from the forest product sector to understand that the land base that is being impacted by these wildfires is so critically important for watershed, for recreation, for economic drivers of the rural communities. And the impacts to these acres, if you will, are really, really challenging for everybody to essentially digest. And it's really destabilizing to a certain extent the industry in Northern California as it relates to forest products, because there's a lot of energy that has to go into restoration of lands, and the forest product sector is looked upon as a partner not only in the suppression world, which we're going to talk about, but also in the prevention world, where we need this industry to be stable so that we can assume the material that's coming off as we're moving forward in fire prevention. And this destabilization of the markets as it relates to trying to consume all the dead and dying material is really putting a lot of that at risk. So I come to you today not with the same kind of request as my colleague, the sheriff that was just speaking. I come with a different type of message today that's going to be focused more on the issues of cooperation versus collaboration. And so I would just like to get somebody from the audience here, from the perspective of an individual IC or a representative of one of the IMTs here, what is the mission and goals of the IMTs, like of an IMT? Somebody just spit it out. Anybody? What's that? put the fire out, right? And so we support that mission, right? And so this is the issue I want to talk about, I guess, is the nuances in today's world. I think, to a certain extent, that the words of cooperator and collaborator are often interchangeably used. But I also believe that there is a very distinct nuance there that I think that today's world is really focusing on. We hear the words cooperator and collaborator a lot. I've heard it a couple times today on both sides. I've heard the terms. And I want to focus specifically on the nuance and difference there. I think that several stakeholders in the past were kind of working from the perspective of being a cooperator, meaning that you are relying upon your stakeholder group, your collective group of individuals with the goal of trying to achieve your own goal, right? The cooperator status. I have the goal of doing X, Y, and Z, and I'm going to try to work with you to achieve my goal, where collaboration is very different. That's talking about a joint vision, a joint necessity, a joint objective, and working together to get to that joint outcome. And as the gentleman up here said, put the fires out. The forest product sector is solely behind that. And we want to work with the IMTs on a consistent basis to make sure that we are a good collaborator and that we're building reciprocity in that field so that we are working towards that joint goal of getting fires out sooner rather than later, if possible. Now, turning back to the 2022 fire season, a couple quick observations. And we had our annual conference a couple weeks ago, and I had Chief Tyler and Chief Eberline with me, and we talked about this to a certain extent. The 2022 fire season was relatively modest, all in all, but a couple of the incidents there were pretty dramatic. The McKinney fire, for those of you from Northern California, and the folks from the forestry sector that own and operate lands adjacent to the Forest Service lands, run facilities up there, had been sitting, waiting for that McKinney fire ignition to happen with the recognition that the topography, the prevailing winds, the vegetation present could have turned into an absolute disaster. Now, the McKinney fire still was an 80,000 acre fire, and several of our companies lost, upwards of 40,000, that's not true, about 25,000 acres in that fire. But the point is that from the perspective of the folks that were engaged from the forest products sector, that the collaboration between the Forest Service and CAL FIRE on that particular incident, along not dismissing the local cooperators too, it was noticeably different. And now I will say that there was also some favorable weather last year, which was helpful from my perspective anyhow. But the cooperation that was palpable between the Forest Service and CAL FIRE allowed, from the perspective of many engaged and watching from the outside looking in, allowed tactical advantages to be garnered during times of favorable weather conditions. And that is something that we want to build off of looking into the future, if at all possible. So it lends the question, in my opinion, what is, this whole focus on collaborators? To me, that represents some level of shared responsibility. And I think that the timber industry, if you will, the forest product sector, recognize that there's shared responsibilities on all sides. We have been engaged, we have liaisons, if you will, that engage at incident command or with IC and at the IMTs during deployment. And we also recognize the fact that the line of communications between company reps, if you will, and the IMTs has also grown dramatically over the course of the last couple of years, and we want to continue to build off that. But what is it that we can do? What is our responsibility in that? And I think that one of the responsibilities, to the point that was discussed earlier in the previous speaker, is open lines of communication. I try to compel our members to engage heartily and early with the CAL FIRE unit chiefs, as well as with the forest soups, so that there is an open line of communication, understanding, recognition, and mutual respect before emergency or crisis situations arise. And then doing the same with the liaisons within the IMTs, I think is critical as well. And so that's kind of what we're trying to launch on. That's what we're trying to build on here today. So one of the issues that we have a couple things that we're going to pass out to you today. I have hard copies. I do not have hard copies for 600 people. I had to fly down here and I couldn't tote 25 reams of paper with me. But we did provide a couple. We have a couple pieces that I think are going to be interesting for you all to consider and taking a copy of, particularly the liaisons within the 16 IMTs that are represented here today. One of them is essentially a contact list for all of the individual companies in Northern California that have been afflicted by or are likely to be afflicted by wildfire in the near future. And the reason why that's so critical is that these individual companies have, as a collective, have hundreds of individuals that have essentially been tied to these landscapes throughout a career. They know the points of access. They know the veg types. They know where treatments have occurred. They know where points of access may be present but have failed and no longer are viable. The gate systems, the adjacent landowners, there's a lot of value to that type of data as it relates to, at least in my opinion, as it relates to tactical decisions that are being made during emergency response. Another piece of it is data, and this is something that I'm going to, like GIS data, like physical GIS data, mapped data. This is something I need feedback from you on. How many folks in the room know that Cal Forest or the forest products sector as a whole has been submitting landowner data to CAL FIRE and ultimately to the Forest Service for reliance during emergency response? How many people have used it often? Is it something that's used often? So this is something that I think that we could build on, in my opinion. And I was talking to a colleague of mine, Chief Shy. He's in the room somewhere. Chief Shy, there he is right there. We worked together a long time ago, and I was asking about this landowner data set, and he said, well, we're concerned about this landowner data set because the issue is that the vision is it's proprietary in nature. And I want to dispel that. For the incident management teams, the data is not proprietary in nature. And we work hardly every single year to get it up to date, recognizing fee land title transfers, recognizing new roads being abandoned, new roads being built, water holes being developed, gate systems coming up or down, these kind of things. And we push that information to CAL FIRE. And when I talk to some of the liaisons in the past, some know it's present and some do not. And that's what I think that we really need to focus on, breaking that barrier of communication down. So I'm kind of looking to you folks on ideas on how Cal Forest can better manage that, because right now the data gets passed to CAL FIRE and manipulated and passed around on external transfer drives, and then you may or may not know that it's present, and then you're trying to pull it up and it's a large data set and it's not working when you're in the back 40 of Modoc County, so on and so forth. So we really want to focus on that particular issue. I want to take one quick second to recognize Matt Pontus. Matt, can you stand up real quick? Matt Pontus is with Sierra Pacific Industries, and he's with me today. And with us, we brought 16 thumb drives. And we're trying a new exercise here today to try to get a subset of those data over to the IMTs directly today. So we are going to be passing off, Matt will be passing off to Blanca, I believe, these thumb drives. And embedded on the thumb drives specifically, we have a myriad of information on there. Much of it is GIS derived, while some of it is not. But in terms of, and I should be very clear, it has most landowner property lines within the Sierras, Cascades, and the coast region. It has road data and access as it relates to Sierra Nevada Cascades for the most part. It has water hole presence, gate locations, and all of this should be able to be opened up, metabolized. Now, what I will admit is it's not standardized to the consistency that you guys may like to have it. And that's the kind of thing that I want to know. Is giving this information in a venue like this helpful? When you open it up and look at it, is it standardized to the detail or to the quality that you all would actually rely upon it. Because from our perspective, access to water, gates, so on and so forth, veg types is all very critical. In addition to all that, we've actually downloaded the FRAP data, and those from CAL FIRE, I'm assuming know FRAP well, where we have entered into an MOU with the state to provide information as relates to where vegetation treatments are occurring, the timeline that they've been implemented, the maintenance schedule on them if maintenance has occurred, and we've also provided that information on this thumb drive as well, because in addition to access and topography and water locations and so on and so forth, treatment areas are also very critical, in my opinion, I suppose, as it relates to making tactical decisions of where assets will be deployed. So we're trying to get the data out to you readily, quickly, and trying to break the chain of the myriad touch points to trying to get it to you each individually as IMTs. So I want feedback from you. Helpful, not helpful. You don't have to get back to me at this particular moment, but hopefully I can be president again next year. And if I am president again next year, I would like to refine this process so that the data is coming to you better, if you will, standardized if necessary, in the right projection, if it's not in the right projection. I might be speaking GIS lingo to people that don't understand it, but those that do run GIS understand what I'm saying. And I need feedback from you because this is our responsibility. We need to be collecting the data, getting it standardized, and getting it to you in the most readily, in the most efficient process possible so that you, prior to the onset of fire season, can look at it, upload it if necessary, and rely upon it when fires in Northern California occur. That pretty much wraps up my presentation today. Again, I think it's really important distinction between a cooperator and a collaborator, and we share the exact same mission that you all do as ICs or IMT representatives. We are looking for rapid deployment. We are looking for safe conditions for fire suppression activities. We don't want to put firefighters at risk. We also want to see communities protected because that really affects our employee base and so on and so forth. So we are on board as a collaborator. We want this to happen and we want to help you where we can. We don't want to be intrusive, but we want to be helpful. The last thing that I wanted to point out, and I know that there's several folks from Region 5 leadership here today, is that one of our sister associations that works at a national level, now CalForest is a forest products sector association in the state level. There's an association at the national level called National Association of Forest Owners. They've been working with the Forest Service for the last, maybe 2.5 months, maybe 3 months now at the national level. And we are a member of NAFO, and we have now executed an MOU with with Chief Moore as it relates to this whole premise of collaboration. And I have copies of it. It was made publicly available yesterday. And so I wanted to bring a couple hundred copies for those that are interested. You can review it. Again, it's predicated on this idea of collaboration, not cooperation. And really what it comes down to is in times of extreme drawdown, we recognize that we have assets to bear it as well. We have contractors, we have employee equipment, we have expertise as it relates to the wildland, the context of the wildlands in which you're working within. We have our own networks within our communities, and we want to bring those to bear where possible to assist when drawdown occurs or in initial attack when fires are still small and there may be contractors on the ground. Again, this MOU that we have, and again, I encourage you to take a copy of it, it represents a collaborative effort and it shares responsibility across all folks. We recognize that the equipment that we have and can bring to bear as it relates to suppression activities has to be inspected, has to be red carded, has to be enrolled in Viper, has to be enrolled in HIMSS. That's our responsibility to try to accomplish. We take on that responsibility and are going to do our best to engage on that effort, we would ask, as in reciprocity, that you recognize that we are trying to do this as fast as we possibly can, as well as we possibly can, and that when emergency crises hit and IMTs are deployed, that assets are out there to be brought to bear for purposes of initial attack or extended attack if necessary. So I'd encourage you to take a look at the MOU. It's brand new. Chief Moore signed it literally last week. Dave Tenney, my colleague, executed it last week as well. We're going to be working with Region 5 leadership here over the course of the next several months to figure out the best, most efficient way to rely upon the tenets of that MOU. And I look forward to being invited next year, maybe. And I want to say is Chief Olson in here. He's my primary chief. Thank you for the invitation. I appreciate it. You reached out and you've been very helpful in getting myself here and liaising, if you will, between myself and the IMT. So thank you very much. Questions? I see one question.
Yeah, just to confirm, one comment and one question. So my name is Mike Wink. I'm ops on Team 1 for CAL FIRE. And the one, just clarification, you said that the map layers are not proprietary, so these are open source. So if these were to end up with anybody viewing them, just to confirm, you're okay with that? It's
a really good question. So it is not open source. We have not, quote unquote, put it out as a publicly available data set. We are directly handing it to you. And for the purposes of emergency response, we encourage you to use it. But going beyond that, there's actually a disclaimer that says if you're using it for other issues, other manners, whatever it may be, that we need to have some level of consultation for that. For emergency response, dig in, use it, rely upon it, and we are solely in support of that. Question 2 was what?
And the second one is just a question and a comment that during these large conflagration fires in the timber specifically, we order resources like feller bunchers and skidders and skidgens and all that kind of stuff that is really specific to the timber industry. And sometimes you folks there on the land have them, but would really encourage you to have your vendors sign up through Viper and HEMS, because we continually order those resources to protect values at risk, and we shop and we get nothing. So we can't hire anything to use those specialized resources because they're not signed up.
Yeah.
So I would encourage you to have your vendors sign up so that when we do need those resources to protect values at risk and put in line with the right tool for the right job, that they're available. Because multiple times, I can't think of one time where we've actually got what we needed. So that's something that you can help with.
I will admit that this issue of HEMS and Viper is something that I've kind of focused on over the course of my year and a half being with Cal Forests. It's a complex system. They're complex systems, I should say. And so when and I totally respect your comment and I acknowledge it and I think that you're right. The problem that we face is, to a certain extent, these folks that own and operate these pieces of equipment, they might be a mom and pop shop. They might have 4 pieces of equipment, a water truck, a dozer, a masticator or 2. And the sheer level of process to get them enrolled is challenging. That's one of the issues that I personally am trying to smooth over the course of my tenure with Cal Forest and working with our partners in the contracting world. For organizations that are larger timber companies, the process is not as challenging, but generally speaking, contractors are often relied upon because not many folks in the forest product sector retain high levels of equipment for timber harvest or fuel hazard reduction any longer. It's more along relying upon these small, what we know as JIPO loggers, if you will, JIPO operators. They just can't run through the process, and we need to help them. And so I think that is somewhere like we recognize that that's our responsibility. We could really use the help of CAL FIRE and the Forest Service at times to help get folks enrolled as well, because it's complex, it's a complex system. And the contracting in and of itself is complex as well. So one of the things that I'm hoping, and this is something that's going to come to bear here in the near future, is that the MOU that we have signed that I've providing to everybody today, if you want a copy of it, is going to bring those conversations to light and figuring out more efficient ways to get higher levels of assistance to you all during times of initial attack or drawdown. But your comment's a good one, and it's totally germane, and I understand. Any other questions? All right, thank you again. Thanks, Chief, for the invitation, and I look forward to working with you all in the near future.
All right, we're going to have Derek Parker come up and give us some announcements.
Okay, you guys hungry? All right. Okay, so we're going to break a little early for lunch. We'll call this 11:30. We will reconvene back at 1300. The way we're going to break everybody out of here for lunch is we're going to take this whole section over here to the west, and then half of this middle section from Team 4 back. You guys are going to go out and head for lunch once we're done briefing you guys out for the afternoon. So you'll be the first group. The second group, we'll make an announcement based on when that food line is reset and we're ready to go. Just some reminders here. Make sure that we get our evaluations turned in. The executive Q&A, make sure we have that completed by 1700 for tomorrow. And then this afternoon's breakouts, we have our functional breakouts at 1300 to 1500, and then we will have our team meetings from 1500 to 1700. Up on the board, you should see the list of rooms. CAL FIRE and CWCG executive and agency administrators will have their afternoon meeting, and that'll be in MR 1, 2, and 3. So we'll go ahead and release everybody over here for lunch, and from Team 4 back, and we'll keep everybody abreast of when the line's ready. One quick note. The CWCG executive, CAL FIRE, and agency administrators will actually be in this room. This room.